The salt wind carried my father's voice across the dock like a slap. "Security, remove this woman. She's not on the guest list." I stood there clutching my purse while 50 wealthy guests turned to watch my humiliation. My own father, the man whose blood runs through my veins, had just called security on me. My sister Amelia stepped forward, our mother's pearl necklace glittering at her throat, the necklace I was never allowed to touch. "Did you really think you belonged here, Monica?" She laughed. "I personally crossed your name off the list. The maid is taking your spot. At least she's useful." My stepmother smirked from behind her champagne glass. My father wouldn't even look at me. 32 years of being told I was worthless. 32 years of being the family's shame. They thought this was my final humiliation. They had no idea. Because when the captain descended from that $5 million yacht, he didn't look at my father. He didn't acknowledge my sister. He walked straight to me, removed his hat, and bowed. "Welcome aboard, Madam Owner. We've been expecting you." The silence that followed, absolutely delicious. You see, my family had been living a lie for 14 years, and the truth they buried with my mother. It was about to resurrect itself in the most spectacular way possible. This is the story of how my father tried to erase me, and how I discovered that my weak, helpless mother had secretly made me the heir to everything. Every satisfying, every satisfying twist you're hoping for. It's coming. Stay with me. My name is Monica Campbell. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in Boston. For 14 years, I've built my life from nothing, no family support, no inheritance, no safety net. Everything I have, I earned with my own hands. But today, standing at this marina in Newport, I'm not here as a successful professional. I'm here as the daughter who was thrown away. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, a formal card cream-colored with gold embossing announcing the Campbell family's annual summer yacht celebration. My name was printed at the bottom in elegant script. After 14 years of silence, I thought perhaps something had changed. Perhaps my father had softened with age. Perhaps my sister had grown beyond the petty cruelty of her teenage years. I should have known better. The Newport Marina gleamed under the June sunshine, its docks lined with vessels worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Wealthy families strolled past in linen suits and designer sundresses, their laughter floating on the salt breeze. I had dressed carefully for this occasion, a modest navy dress, simple pearl earrings I'd bought for myself years ago, sensible heels that wouldn't catch in the dock planks. I wanted to look respectable. I wanted to belong. The yacht sat at the end of the main pier, its white hull gleaming like a palace on water. Even from a distance, I could see the name painted in elegant letters, the Eleanor, my mother's name. The sight of it made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Grief, perhaps, or longing for a woman I barely had time to know. I was halfway down the pier when I saw him. My father stood at the base of the gangway like a sentry, his silver hair impeccable, his navy blazer crisp despite the humidity. Beside him, my stepmother adjusted her oversized sunglasses with manicured fingers. And there was Amelia, my younger sister, her blonde hair cascading over shoulders that were draped in silk. I slowed my steps. Something felt wrong. The way they were positioned, the way their eyes tracked my approach, this wasn't a welcoming party. This was an ambush. "Monica." My father's voice carried across the remaining distance, sharp enough to make nearby guests turn their heads. "I don't know why you're here, but you need to leave." I stopped walking. The words hit me like a physical blow, though some part of me had been bracing for exactly this. I received an invitation. It had my name on it. A clerical error. He didn't even blink. One that has been corrected. Amelia stepped forward, and that's when I saw it, the necklace resting against her collarbone. My mother's pearls. The strand that had been in our family for 3 generations, the one piece of jewelry my mother had specifically mentioned wanting me to have. I remembered the way she used to let me touch them when I was small, the cool smoothness of each bead against my fingertips. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Amelia caught me staring. She lifted the pearls with one finger, letting them catch the light. Mother would have wanted me to have them. I was always her favorite after all. The lie burned in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had learned long ago that arguing with Amelia only made things worse. "I just want to attend the family gathering." I hated how small my voice sounded. "I'm not asking for anything else, just a few hours." My father's expression hardened into something I recognized from childhood, that particular combination of disgust and dismissal that had haunted my earliest memories. "You lack the class to board this yacht, Monica. You always have. Some things cannot be taught." A woman nearby gasped softly. I became aware of the audience we had attracted, a dozen guests frozen in place, watching this family drama unfold like a scene from a soap opera. Their pity was worse than their judgment. I could feel it pressing against my skin, suffocating me. "The guest list has been finalized," my stepmother added, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Your spot has been given to Maria. She's been with our family for 15 years after all. She's earned her place." Maria, the housekeeper. They had replaced me with the household staff. Amelia laughed a bright, cruel sound. "Go home, Monica. There's nothing for you here. There never was." I stood frozen on that dock, the sun beating down on my shoulders, surrounded by strangers who would go home tonight and tell stories about the poor woman who was publicly rejected by her own family. I thought about turning around. I thought about walking away with whatever dignity I could salvage. But something held me in place. Maybe it was the memory of my mother's voice, soft and urgent in those final days before she died. Maybe it was 14 years of rebuilding myself from ashes. Or maybe it was simply that I was tired, bone-deep exhausted of being treated like I was worthless. "I'm not leaving." The words came out steadier than I expected. My father's face reddened. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. "Madam Campbell." Everyone turned. A man in a captain's uniform was descending the gangway, his white hat tucked respectfully under his arm. He was perhaps 60, with weathered features that spoke of decades at sea, and he walked with the quiet authority of someone who commanded respect without demanding it. He walked past my father without a glance, past my stepmother, past Amelia with her stolen pearls. He stopped directly in front of me and inclined his head in a gesture of unmistakable deference. "Madam Campbell," he repeated. "I am Captain Edward Shaw. I've been waiting for you." "What is the meaning of this?" My father's voice cracked with outrage. "I am Richard Campbell. I chartered this vessel." The captain turned slowly, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "With respect, sir, you did not charter this vessel. You were permitted to use it for today's event as a courtesy. This yacht belongs to the Campbell Family Trust, which was established 21 years ago." He paused, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, satisfaction perhaps. "The sole beneficiary of that trust is Miss Monica Eleanor Campbell." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the water lapping against the hull. "That's impossible," Amelia whispered. "That's absolutely impossible." But the captain had already turned back to me, extending his hand toward the gangway with a formal bow. "Please step aboard, Madam Owner. Everything has been prepared according to your mother's instructions." I couldn't feel my legs as I walked up the gangway. The polished wood beneath my feet, the gleaming brass railings, the pristine white deck, none of it seemed real. Behind me, I could hear my father's sputtering protests, my stepmother's shrill voice demanding explanations, but their words faded into meaningless noise. The captain walked beside me with measured steps, his presence steady and reassuring, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Perhaps he had. "This way, Madam Campbell." He gestured toward a door marked "Private" in elegant gold lettering. "There are documents you need to see, documents that will explain everything." I followed him through a corridor lined with mahogany panels and original artwork past a lounge area that could have graced the pages of an architectural magazine. The yacht was even more magnificent inside than out crystal chandeliers, leather furnishings, floors so polished they reflected the light like mirrors. This vessel was worth millions, and according to the captain, it belonged to me. The control room was located on the upper deck, a space filled with navigation equipment and monitors, but also furnished with a desk, leather chairs, and a wall safe that the captain approached with a key from his pocket. My family had followed us aboard. I could hear them arguing with crew members somewhere below, but the captain had stationed 2 officers at the door to ensure our privacy. 21 years ago, he began opening the safe and withdrawing a thick manila envelope. Your mother came to me with a proposal. I was a young officer then, working on commercial vessels, dreaming of commanding my own ship someday. She offered me that dream. She purchased this yacht and appointed me as its captain, and as the trustee of a legal entity she called the Campbell Family Trust. He placed the envelope on the desk and opened it, carefully spreading documents across the polished surface. I saw my mother's handwriting on several pages, that familiar, elegant script that I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists, and the one letter she had left me when she died. These are the original trust documents, the captain continued. Signed and notarized when you were 11 years old. Your mother transferred all her personal assets into this trust. The yacht, several real estate properties, investment accounts, and other holdings I'm not at liberty to discuss until the formal reading with her attorney. I picked up one of the documents with trembling hands. The legal language blurred before my eyes, but I caught phrases that made my breath catch: sole beneficiary Monica Eleanor Campbell, and to be revealed upon the beneficiary's 30th birthday, and in the presence of immediate family members. She planned this, I whispered. She planned this moment. Down to the smallest detail. The captain's voice held a note of admiration. Your mother specified that the truth should only be revealed when your family gathered publicly for a significant event. She wanted witnesses. She wanted them to be exposed in front of the same society they valued so highly. The door burst open before I could respond. My father stormed in his face, crimson with rage, brushing past the officers who tried to restrain him. Amelia and my stepmother crowded in behind him, their expressions cycling between shock and fury. "This is fraud," my father shouted, slamming his palm on the desk. "Eleanor was a housewife. She didn't have assets. She didn't have business sense. She couldn't have established a trust because she had nothing to put in it." The captain regarded him with cold composure. "With respect, Mr. Campbell, that is entirely false. Eleanor Mitchell Campbell was the founder and principal owner of Mitchell Properties, a real estate investment firm that she built from a single rental property into a portfolio worth approximately $47 million at the time of her death. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. $47 million. "You're lying," Amelia said, but her voice wavered. "Mother never worked. She stayed home with us. She was fragile. She was sick. She was none of those things." The captain cut her off without raising his voice. Eleanor Campbell was one of the most astute businesswomen I have ever encountered. She operated her company under her maiden name to maintain privacy, and she deliberately concealed her success from her husband because she knew. He paused, looking directly at my father. She knew exactly what kind of man she had married. My father's face had gone from red to white. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. "This cannot possibly be legal. She was my wife. Her assets were marital property. I had rights." "You had no rights," the captain interrupted. "Mrs. Campbell established Mitchell Properties before your marriage, and she maintained it as separate property throughout. Every document was reviewed by attorneys specifically to ensure that you could never touch her holdings. She anticipated your objections, Mr. Campbell. She anticipated everything." I sank into one of the leather chairs, my mind racing to reconcile the mother I remembered with the woman being described. The mother I knew had been gentle, soft-spoken, always tired. She spent her days in bed during those final years, too weak to attend my school events, too ill to fight back when my father criticized her. I had believed she was fragile because that was what I had been told over and over until it became unquestionable truth. But what if the weakness was a mask? What if she had been hiding in plain sight, building an empire while everyone dismissed her as helpless? Why didn't she tell me? The question escaped before I could stop it. If she had all of this, why did she let him treat her that way? Why did she let him treat me that way? The captain's expression softened. "That answer is in a letter she left for you. I'm not permitted to share its contents. Those were her instructions. But I can tell you this, everything she did, every decision she made was designed to protect you. She knew she was dying and she knew what would happen to you after she was gone. This trust was her way of ensuring that when you were old enough and strong enough, you would have the resources to claim your rightful place." "Who told her about this?" My father's scream shattered the moment. His eyes darted wildly between the captain and me, his composure completely gone. "Someone in this family is a traitor. Someone has been planning this behind my back." My father's accusation echoed off the mahogany walls, but I barely heard him. His words, "traitor planning behind my back," seemed to come from very far away, as if I were underwater and he were shouting from the surface. My mind had traveled somewhere else, entirely pulled backward through time to a childhood I had spent years trying to forget. I was 7 years old the first time my father told me I made my mother sad. We were sitting at the dinner table, one of those rare occasions when our family ate together, and my mother had excused herself early, pressing her hand to her temple as she retreated to her bedroom. I had asked if she was okay if I could bring her some water, and my father had fixed me with that cold stare I would come to know so well. "She's sad because of you, Monica. She was fine before you came along. You exhaust her with your neediness." I was 7. I didn't know how to process such cruelty from the person who was supposed to protect me. So I absorbed it. I internalized it. I began to believe that my very existence was a burden, that my mother's frequent retreats to her room were somehow my fault, that if I could just be better, quieter, less present, perhaps she would feel well again. The accusations multiplied as I grew older. When my mother's health declined, I was told I had caused her illness through the stress of my difficult personality. When she stopped attending my school plays and parent-teacher conferences, I was told she couldn't bear to be seen with a daughter who brought such shame to the family. When she spent weeks at a time barely leaving her bedroom, I was told it was because looking at me reminded her of everything that had gone wrong in her life. I believed every word. Why wouldn't children trust their parents to tell them the truth? Children don't have the framework to recognize psychological warfare disguised as paternal guidance. Meanwhile, Amelia flourished under a completely different set of rules. She was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she could walk, she was treated like visiting royalty. When Amelia broke a vase, it was an accident that could happen to anyone. When I broke a glass, it was evidence of my carelessness and disrespect. When Amelia brought home mediocre grades, she was praised for her effort. When I brought home honors, I was asked why I hadn't done better. I used to hate my sister for it. I spent my teenage years seething with resentment every time I watched her receive the affection and approval I craved. But standing here now, watching her face cycle through confusion and fear as her world collapsed, I felt something unexpected pity. Amelia hadn't been born cruel. She had been manufactured. Our father had spent years poisoning her mind against me, teaching her that I was the source of our family's problems, that I was competition to be eliminated, rather than a sister to be loved. He had given her everything while giving me nothing, then stood back and watched as the natural resentment bloomed exactly as he intended. We were both his victims. I was simply old enough now to see the manipulation for what it was. "You're lying," Amelia whispered, but she was looking at our father rather than the captain. "You told me Mother had nothing. You told me she was dependent on you for everything. You told me—" She stopped, her throat working as if the words had turned to stones. "Amelia." Our father's voice carried a warning note I recognized from childhood. It was the tone that said, "Stop talking before you say something you'll regret." But my attention had drifted again, caught by another memory that surfaced like a bubble rising through dark water. I was perhaps 10 years old, sitting in our living room with a coloring book, while my mother entertained a visitor in the adjacent parlor. The woman was elegant, silver-haired, even then with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. I remembered peeking around the doorframe, curious about this stranger who made my mother smile in a way she rarely did anymore. The woman had caught me watching. Instead of the irritation I expected from adults who found children underfoot, she had looked at me with an expression I couldn't name at the time. Now, with the perspective of age, I could identify it: compassion, deep, knowing compassion, as if she understood exactly what my life was like and grieved for me. My mother had introduced her as Mrs. Hawthorne, a business associate, she had said, which made no sense to me then because I believed my mother had no business. The visit was brief, perhaps an hour, and I never saw Mrs. Hawthorne again. But I never forgot the way she had looked at me like she was making a silent promise. Had she known, even then had Mrs. Hawthorne been aware of my mother's secret empire, of the trust being established, of the elaborate plans being laid for my protection? The thought made my head spin. How many people had been watching over me without my knowledge while I stumbled through life, believing I was utterly alone, Madam Campbell? The captain's voice pulled me back to the present. I believe you should have this. He was holding something out to me, a velvet box, aged but well preserved. Your mother left specific instructions that this be given to you today. I opened the box with unsteady hands. Inside, resting on faded silk, was a necklace. Not the pearls Amelia was wearing; those had belonged to our grandmother. This was something different. A delicate gold chain with a pendant in the shape of a small oval locket. I lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, and something shifted inside it. That was your mother's most treasured possession, the captain said. She wore it every day until she became too ill to leave her bed. I examined the locket more closely, running my thumb over its surface. There was a seam along one edge, almost invisible, suggesting the oval could be opened. But there was more, a second seam, even more subtle on the back. A hidden compartment within a hidden compartment. Something was concealed inside this locket. Something my mother had protected so carefully that she designed 2 layers of secrecy to keep it safe. I held the locket in my palm, feeling its weight and the subtle shift of something hidden within, and the memory came rushing back with such force that I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. The night I left home, the night my father made it clear that I was not merely unwanted, but actively despised. I had buried that memory deep, but standing here surrounded by evidence of my mother's secret life, it demanded to be remembered. My 18th birthday had fallen on a Thursday in late September. I remember because I had been looking forward to the weekend when I planned to visit the community college campus and pick up enrollment forms. I had saved enough money from my part-time job at the grocery store to afford 1 or 2 classes, and I had dreams, modest dreams perhaps, but they were mine, of slowly building toward a degree, toward a life that didn't depend on my father's approval. He summoned me to his study that evening. The room had always intimidated me with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. He never read, purchased by the yard to create an impression of intellectualism. My father sat behind his massive desk like a king on a throne, and spread before him were documents covered in dense legal text. "Sit down, Monica." His voice was pleasant, almost friendly, which should have been my first warning. He was never pleasant with me unless he wanted something. I sat. He slid the documents across the desk. "These papers formally relinquish your claim to any inheritance from the Campbell family estate. Sign them, and you'll receive a small stipend to help you get started on your own. Refuse, and you'll leave this house with nothing." I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of what I was reading. Legal terms swam before my eyes: hereby surrender all rights, and irrevocable waiver, and in perpetuity. I was 18 years old with a high school education and a part-time job. I had no lawyer, no advocate, no one to explain what I would be giving up. "I don't understand," I said. "Why do I need to sign these? Mother only died 3 years ago. Hasn't her estate already been settled?" The pleasant mask slipped. I watched my father's expression harden into something cold and calculating. "Your mother's estate is none of your concern. What matters is that you are unworthy of bearing the Campbell name, and I will not allow you to destroy this family's reputation by claiming any connection to our wealth. You have brought nothing but shame to this household since the day you were born." "That's not true." The words came out small, barely a whisper. "It is true." He stood his chair, scraping against the hardwood floor. "You killed your mother. Your neediness, your constant demands for attention, your refusal to be the daughter she deserved, you drained the life out of her, and now you expect to profit from her death." "I never asked for anything." My voice cracked. "I just wanted—" "Sign the papers, Monica." "No." The refusal surprised me as much as it surprised him. Something had shifted inside me, some small flame of self-preservation that refused to be extinguished. I won't sign away my rights without understanding what I'm giving up. I want to talk to a lawyer first. What happened next remains burned into my memory with perfect clarity. My father swept his arm across the desk, sending papers and a crystal paperweight crashing to the floor. He grabbed a decorative vase from the bookshelf and hurled it against the wall where it exploded into 1,000 pieces. His face had transformed into something I barely recognized, twisted with a rage that seemed too large for any normal grievance. "You worthless garbage!" he screamed. "You ungrateful, manipulative little parasite! I should have thrown you out years ago. Your mother begged me to keep you, begged me to give you a chance, and look how you repay her memory. Get out. Get out of my house. You have 1 hour to pack your things, and if you're not gone by then, I'll have the police remove you." I fled. I ran up the stairs to my bedroom. My vision blurred by tears, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the railing. And there at the top of the stairs, I saw Amelia. She was standing in the shadow of her doorway, watching. Her face was wet with tears, her body trembling, her eyes wide with terror. But she wasn't looking at me with sympathy or sisterly concern. She was looking at me the way one might look at a dangerous animal with fear and revulsion. "You killed her," Amelia whispered. "Daddy told me. You killed Mommy with your selfishness, and now you're trying to steal from us." I wanted to stop. I wanted to grab my sister by the shoulders and shake her, to make her see that everything our father had told her was lies. But I didn't have time, and I didn't have the words, and some part of me recognized that Amelia was as much a prisoner as I was. Our father had built walls around her mind, walls made of fear and false narrative, and I couldn't tear them down in the hour I had left. I packed what I could fit in 2 suitcases. Clothes, a few books, the small amount of cash I had hidden in a sock drawer. And then as I was clearing out my closet, my hand brushed against something wedged behind the back panel. A box I had never seen before, wrapped in cloth, that had once been white but had yellowed with age. Inside was an envelope addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was brief, just a few paragraphs, but each word seemed to glow with intention. "My darling Monica," it began, "if you are reading this, then things have unfolded as I feared they might. Your father is not the man I once believed him to be, and I am so sorry that I cannot be there to protect you from him. But I have made arrangements. When you turn 30, the truth will follow. Until then, be strong, be patient, and know that you are loved more than you can possibly imagine. Find the woman I trusted most. She will guide you when the time comes." The letter was signed with my mother's name, and below it a single line that would change the course of my life. Eleanor Hawthorne, 247 Beacon Street, Boston. Remember that name. I left my father's house that night with 2 suitcases and an address burned into my memory. The next 12 years of my life were a blur of survival, minimum wage jobs, shared apartments with strangers, community college classes, taken one at a time because that was all I could afford. But I never forgot the name Eleanor Hawthorne, and I never stopped wondering what my mother had meant by, "When you turn 30, the truth will follow." On my 30th birthday, I finally gathered the courage to visit 247 Beacon Street. The townhouse was elegant in that understated Boston way red brick with white trim and window boxes overflowing with geraniums. I stood on the sidewalk for nearly 20 minutes, clutching my mother's letter in one hand and the locket in the other, trying to convince myself to climb the steps and ring the bell. What if Mrs. Hawthorne had moved? What if she had died? What if she looked at me with no recognition at all, and my mother's final message turned out to be nothing but the confused ramblings of a dying woman? The door opened before I could make a decision. A woman stood in the entrance, silver-haired and elegant, older than I remembered, but unmistakably the same person who had visited our home 2 decades ago. She took one look at me and pressed her hand to her heart. "Monica," she breathed. "Oh, my dear child. You look exactly like her." She ushered me inside before I could speak, leading me through a foyer decorated with antique furniture and oil paintings into a sitting room that smelled of old books and lavender. Tea appeared as if by magic, served in delicate china cups that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And then Mrs. Hawthorne sat across from me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and asked to see what I had brought. I handed her the letter first. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as if in prayer, and when she finished, she carefully folded it and placed it on the table between us. Then I gave her the locket. The moment it touched her palm, the tears she had been holding back spilled down her cheeks. "Eleanor gave this to me for safekeeping the week before she died," Mrs. Hawthorne whispered. "She made me promise to ensure it reached you someday. I had the captain hold it until the right moment." She looked up at me with an expression of profound grief. "Your mother was my dearest friend in this world, Monica, the closest thing I ever had to a sister, and watching what happened to her, watching what your father and others did to destroy her, was the most painful experience of my life. I don't understand." My voice came out hoarse. "My mother was sick. She was weak. She couldn't even get out of bed most days." "Your mother was none of those things." Mrs. Hawthorne's voice hardened. "Eleanor Mitchell was one of the most brilliant businesswomen Boston has ever produced. She built Mitchell Properties from nothing, from a single duplex she purchased with money she saved working as a secretary into a real estate empire worth tens of millions of dollars. She was fierce and brilliant and strategic. She was anything but weak." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. The mother I remembered had been fragile, fading, always tired. The mother I remembered had let my father control every aspect of our household without protest. The mother I remembered had died quietly in her bed, defeated by an illness no one ever properly explained. Then why, I asked, why did she seem so helpless? Why did she let him treat us the way he did? Mrs. Hawthorne sighed deeply. Because she was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and she was losing. There was a woman named Victoria Lane, a competitor in the real estate market, who saw your mother as a threat to be eliminated. Victoria was ruthless in ways your mother refused to be. She spread lies about Eleanor's business practices, bribed inspectors to find code violations in her properties, turned investors against her with whispered insinuations of fraud. Your mother spent the last years of her life trying to salvage what she had built while protecting you from the fallout. Victoria Lane. I repeated the name, filing it away. She destroyed my mother's business. She tried. She succeeded in damaging it significantly. But Victoria wasn't working alone, and Mrs. Hawthorne paused, choosing her next words carefully. Your mother believed, and I believe, that her illness was not entirely natural. The stress of the attacks against her business weakened her, yes. But she deteriorated too quickly, too conveniently. She suspected that someone was ensuring she wouldn't recover. A chill ran down my spine. "You're saying someone killed her." "I'm saying that your mother's death was very convenient for certain people. Your father gained control of whatever assets she hadn't managed to protect. Victoria Lane absorbed several of her properties at bargain prices. And someone else, someone your mother could never quite identify, profited most of all by keeping everyone fighting each other." Mrs. Hawthorne rose and walked to a writing desk in the corner of the room. From a locked drawer, she withdrew a thick envelope yellowed with age, but sealed with red wax bearing an imprint I didn't recognize. "Your mother gave this to me 8 months before she died," she said, placing it in my hands. "She made me swear not to open it and not to give it to you until your 30th birthday. She knew Monica. She knew the family would abandon you. She knew your father would try to take everything. And she spent her final months preparing for that eventuality." I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside were documents, bank account information, property deeds, stock certificates, and pages of handwritten notes in my mother's careful script. There were names I didn't recognize, companies I had never heard of, and warnings about people who might try to stop me from claiming what was rightfully mine. "She prepared everything for you to survive," Mrs. Hawthorne said softly, "and to rise. Your mother was dying, but she refused to leave you defenseless. Everything you need to reclaim your inheritance and expose the people who destroyed her, it's all there." I looked up from the documents, my head spinning with information I couldn't yet process. "Victoria Lane. Is she still alive?" Mrs. Hawthorne nodded slowly. "Very much so. She's more powerful now than she was when your mother knew her. But Monica, She reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Victoria Lane is still alive and she's dangerous. But she's not your only enemy. There's someone more dangerous hiding in the shadows, someone who manipulated Victoria, your father, and everyone else like pieces on a chessboard. Your mother never discovered who it was. Finding that person may be the most important thing you ever do." The envelope Mrs. Hawthorne gave me that day contained more than documents. It contained a roadmap for transformation. But transformation, I would learn, doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, discipline, and the willingness to start from the very bottom, even when you know you're destined for something greater. 3 days after our first meeting, Mrs. Hawthorne called me with an offer. She owned a property management company, Hawthorne Holdings, that oversaw commercial and residential buildings throughout New England. She wanted me to come work for her. Not as an executive, not as a protege being groomed for leadership, but as a file clerk in the basement records department. "Your mother built her empire from nothing," Mrs. Hawthorne explained when I hesitated. "She started as a secretary, remember? She learned every aspect of the business from the ground up, and that knowledge made her untouchable. If you want to protect what she left you, you need to understand how it works, every piece of it." I accepted the position. The pay was barely above minimum wage. The work was tedious, and my coworkers ranged from indifferent to openly hostile. But I showed up every day at 7 in the morning and stayed until the last file was sorted, the last document scanned, the last request fulfilled. I learned the filing systems, the accounting codes, the intricate web of regulations that governed property management. I asked questions constantly, took notes obsessively, and read everything I could find about real estate investment during my lunch breaks. Within 6 months, I was promoted to administrative assistant. Within a year, I was managing accounts receivable. By my second anniversary at the company, I had moved into the acquisitions department, where I discovered something unexpected. I was good at this. Really good. The financial analysis that had seemed like impenetrable jargon when I first started now made intuitive sense. I could look at a property listing and see potential that others missed. I understood how to structure deals that benefited all parties while protecting our interests. The skills my father had always insisted I lacked: intelligent strategic thinking, business acumen turned out to be abilities I possessed in abundance. They had simply been buried under years of being told I was worthless. Not everyone appreciated my rise through the ranks. There was a woman named Sandra Chen who had worked in acquisitions for 8 years and believed she was next in line for promotion to department head. When Mrs. Hawthorne began assigning me increasingly complex projects, Sandra's resentment crystallized into active sabotage. It started with small things, files that went missing from my desk emails that somehow never reached my inbox, meeting times that were changed without anyone informing me. I missed a crucial deadline because Sandra had deliberately misfiled a time-sensitive document, and I watched her barely suppress a smirk when our supervisor reprimanded me in front of the entire department. "She's just charity," I overheard Sandra telling a colleague in the break room. "Hawthorne picked her up off the street out of pity. Watch, she'll wash out within 6 months. People like her always do." And the old Monica, the Monica who had been conditioned by 18 years of abuse to believe she deserved mistreatment, might have crumbled under Sandra's campaign. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had read my mother's notes, studied her strategies, absorbed the lessons Mrs. Hawthorne was teaching me. And one of those lessons was this: never react with emotion when you can respond with evidence. I began documenting everything. Every missing file, every mysteriously deleted email, every changed meeting time. I kept copies of all my work in a personal archive, so when documents disappeared, I could produce them instantly. I arrived at meetings early and confirmed all appointments in writing. When Sandra made subtle insinuations about my competence in team discussions, I responded with data, detailed analyses, comprehensive reports, projections that proved accurate down to the decimal point. The confrontation, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Mrs. Hawthorne called Sandra into her office one afternoon and presented her with a folder containing 6 months of documented sabotage. Sandra was terminated that same day. I never said a word to her, never gloated, never acknowledged her existence as she cleaned out her desk. I simply continued doing my job better than anyone expected, better than I had ever believed I could. That evening, Mrs. Hawthorne invited me to her home for dinner. We sat in the same parlor where she had first revealed my mother's secrets, but this time the conversation was different. She looked at me with something that might have been pride. "You handled Sandra exactly the way your mother would have," she said. "Eleanor never wasted energy on petty revenge. She understood that the best way to defeat an enemy is to succeed so completely that their attacks become irrelevant. You've learned that lesson faster than I expected." "I had good teachers," I replied. "My mother and you, Miss Hawthorne smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You've proven yourself, Monica. In 2 years, you've gone from filing documents in a basement to managing million-dollar acquisitions. Your instincts are sharp, your work ethic is impeccable, and you don't crack under pressure. You're ready." "Ready for what?" She reached into a drawer and withdrew another envelope thicker than the first one she had given me, sealed with the same red wax. "Ready to learn the full scope of what your mother left you. The yacht, the properties, the investment accounts, those are just the beginning. Eleanor's empire was vast, Monica. She spent years hiding it, protecting it, ensuring that no one could take it from you. But an inheritance of that size comes with enemies, people who will stop at nothing to seize what's yours." I took the envelope, but didn't open it. "The training," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "The years of working my way up. It wasn't just about learning the business. No, it was about survival." Mrs. Hawthorne leaned forward, her expression grave. "Your father, Victoria Lane, whoever was pulling the strings behind your mother's destruction, they're all still out there. They'll come for you the moment they realize you've claimed your inheritance. And if you're not strong enough to fight them, they'll destroy you the same way they destroyed Eleanor." The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about a battle that had been raging since before I was born, a war I had inherited along with my mother's fortune. "Before you inherit anything," Mrs. Hawthorne continued, "you must learn who truly destroyed your mother. Victoria Lane played her part, but she was never the mastermind. Someone else orchestrated everything, and Monica, they're still watching you." The envelope Mrs. Hawthorne handed me that evening contained a key to a safety deposit box at a bank I had never heard of. The next morning we drove together to a nondescript building in the financial district, passed through 3 levels of security, and descended into a vault that felt more like a bunker than a banking facility. What I found inside that steel-lined room changed everything I thought I knew about my mother and the life she had secretly built. Spread across a polished conference table were documents that mapped an empire. Mrs. Hawthorne guided me through them one by one, her voice steady but tinged with awe, as if even she hadn't fully appreciated the scope of what Eleanor Mitchell Campbell had created. There were real estate holdings across 6 states, apartment complexes, commercial buildings, undeveloped land in areas that had since become prime locations. There were shares in investment firms that had grown exponentially since my mother's death, their dividends quietly accumulating in accounts I never knew existed. There were trust funds established in my name before I turned 5, structured so intricately that no one without the proper documentation could even prove they existed, let alone access them. And then there were the Swiss accounts. Your mother opened these during a business trip to Geneva when you were 3 years old, Mrs. Hawthorne explained, pointing to a series of account numbers written in my mother's careful hand. She never told anyone about them. Not your father, not her business partners, not even me, until shortly before she died. She called them her insurance policy. I stared at the figures, struggling to comprehend the numbers. How much is in these accounts? As of the last statement I received, approximately $12 million. But that was 5 years ago. With interest and investment returns, it could be significantly more by now. $12 million, hidden in Switzerland. Added to everything else, the properties, the investments, the trust funds. My mother had left me a fortune that dwarfed anything I had imagined. She hadn't just been wealthy, she had been extraordinarily, strategically, almost incomprehensibly rich. Why didn't anyone know about this? I asked. If she had this much money, how did she keep it hidden? Mrs. Hawthorne smiled grimly. Because your mother was a genius, Monica, not just at making money, but at protecting it. She understood that wealth attracts predators, and she built her empire with layers of corporations, trusts, and holding companies that made it nearly impossible to trace. Even your father, with all his lawyers and accountants, could only see a fraction of what she truly owned. She pulled out another document, a legal filing from 18 years ago, yellowed with age, but still bearing the official stamps of a Boston court. This is what happened when your father tried to take control after your mother became ill. He filed a petition claiming that she was mentally incompetent and that he should be appointed conservator of her estate. I scanned the document, my stomach turning. The language was clinical, almost cruel, describing my mother as incapable of managing her own affairs and a danger to her own financial well-being. My father's signature was at the bottom, bold and confident, as if he had been certain of his victory. The petition was denied. Mrs. Hawthorne continued. Your mother had anticipated this move years earlier. She had established independent medical evaluations, created ironclad documentation of her mental competence, and structured her assets so that even if a court declared her incapacitated, your father could never touch the core of her wealth. He was humiliated, publicly forced to withdraw his petition when her lawyers presented evidence that he had been lying about her condition. The pieces were finally falling into place. My father's rage toward me, his relentless cruelty, his determination to drive me from the family, none of it had been about me at all. It had been about her, about the woman who had outsmarted him, protected her fortune from his grasping hands, and ensured that her daughter would inherit everything he had tried to steal. He hated me because he couldn't hate her anymore, I said slowly. She was gone, so he transferred everything onto me. You were Eleanor's greatest triumph, Mrs. Hawthorne confirmed. The child she fought to protect, the heir to the fortune he could never touch. Every time he looked at you, he saw his own failure, and he punished you for it. The revelation should have brought me peace, finally understanding that my father's abuse was never about my inadequacy, but about his own frustrated greed. Instead, I felt a cold fury building in my chest. He had made my life a misery because he couldn't accept being outsmarted by his own wife, Mrs. Hawthorne spread another set of documents across the table. These were different, not my mother's careful records, but legal filings, corporate transfers, property sales that had occurred after her death. Not everything survived, she said quietly. Victoria Lane and her associates moved quickly once your mother was gone. They acquired several of her properties at prices far below market value, using shell companies to hide their involvement. They exploited legal loopholes, bribed officials, and in some cases simply forged documents to claim assets that should have been protected. How much did they take? Conservatively, between $8 and $10 million worth of property. Some of it has been developed and resold multiple times since then, which makes recovery complicated, but not impossible. She looked at me intently. You are the sole beneficiary of your mother's estate, Monica. You have legal standing to challenge these transfers, to demand audits to expose the fraud that occurred. Everything Victoria Lane stole can potentially be reclaimed. But she won't let that happen without a fight. No, she won't. Victoria has spent 15 years believing she got away with what she did. She's built her current empire partly on the foundation she stole from your mother. If you come forward with these documents, you're not just threatening her finances, you're threatening to expose her as a fraud and a thief. People like Victoria don't surrender stolen fortunes quietly. I gathered the documents carefully, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. I had spent 2 years preparing for this moment, building skills and knowledge and resilience. I was ready to fight for what was mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a routine notification, but what I saw made my blood run cold. An email from an address I didn't recognize with no subject line. The message contained only 7 words. Stop digging or you'll end up like your mother. The memory of that threatening email faded as I stood on the deck of my yacht watching my family struggle to comprehend the complete reversal of their fortunes. 2 years had passed since that anonymous message arrived on my phone. 2 years of preparation, investigation, and careful planning. Now finally, I was ready to confront the people who had stolen my childhood and attempted to steal my inheritance. The marina had become an amphitheater. Guests who had been boarding their own vessels now stood frozen on the docks, champagne flutes forgotten in their hands, watching the Campbell family drama unfold with undisguised fascination. I could see them whispering to each other, phones discreetly raised to capture the spectacle. By tomorrow morning, this scene would be the talk of every country club and charity gala in Newport. The thought brought me a grim satisfaction. My father had abandoned his attempts at intimidation. He stood on the deck looking diminished. Somehow, his commanding presence deflated by the public exposure of his lies. My stepmother clutched his arm with white-knuckled fingers, her social smile frozen into something resembling a grimace. And Amelia, my sister, who had flaunted our mother's pearls and announced my replacement by the household maid, stood slightly apart from them, her face cycling through emotions too quickly to catalogue. "This is absurd." My father tried again, but his voice had lost its thunder. The yacht was purchased with family money. Eleanor had no independent assets of any significance. Whatever documents you've produced are obviously forgeries. Captain Shaw stepped forward, and I noticed he had positioned himself slightly in front of me, as if instinctively shielding me from my own family. "Mr. Campbell, I have served as trustee of the Campbell Family Trust for 21 years. Every document in my possession has been authenticated by independent legal authorities. The purchase records, the trust establishment papers, the transfer of ownership, all of it is genuine and legally binding." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "This yacht has never belonged to you. You have been permitted to use it as a courtesy, extended by Mrs. Eleanor Campbell before her death, and continued by me in accordance with her wishes until Miss Monica reached the age of 30. The watching crowd murmured with barely concealed delight. There is something universally satisfying about watching arrogant people receive their comeuppance, and my family had cultivated arrogance like a prized orchid for as long as anyone could remember. "Monica!" My stepmother's voice had shifted from its usual condescension to something approaching desperation. "Surely we can discuss this privately. There's no need to air family matters in front of strangers. Whatever misunderstandings exist, we can resolve them like civilized people." I regarded her coolly. This woman had stood by while my father threw me out of my childhood home. She had worn my mother's jewelry, slept in my mother's bed, spent money that should have been my mother's legacy. And now she wanted to appeal to family loyalty. "You may board the yacht," I said finally. "All of you." Relief flickered across their faces, quickly suppressed. "However," I continued, "you will board as my guests. You will be accompanied by security at all times. You will not enter my private quarters or any area designated as restricted, and you will conduct yourselves with the courtesy appropriate to guests who have been extended a privilege they do not deserve." My father's face reddened. "Now see here. Those are my conditions." I cut him off without raising my voice. "Accept them or return to the dock. The choice is yours." The silence stretched between us. I watched my father struggle with the unfamiliar sensation of being powerless, of having no leverage, no authority, no weapon to use against the daughter he had spent 32 years diminishing. Finally, with visible effort, he nodded. "We accept." I gestured to the captain, who directed my family up the gangway with professional efficiency. Security officers in discreet navy blazers fell into step beside them, a visible reminder that their movements would be monitored. As they passed me, I saw something new in their eyes. Not respect, perhaps, but certainly a wariness that had never been there before. For the first time in my life, they were uncertain of me. Dinner was served in the grand dining room at 7 o'clock. The space was magnificent crystal chandeliers, casting warm light across a mahogany table set with fine china and sterling silver floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the darkening harbor. I had arranged for a 5-course meal prepared by the yacht's private chef, each dish more exquisite than the last. My family ate in near silence, the awkwardness broken only by stilted compliments about the food and occasional remarks about the weather. I watched them from my seat at the head of the table, a position my father had occupied at every family meal I could remember. He sat to my right now, visibly uncomfortable with the reversal, cutting his filet mignon into precise squares that he barely tasted. My stepmother made conversation with the empty air, commenting on the lovely table settings and the exceptional wine selection. Emilia stared at her plate, the stolen pearls around her neck suddenly seeming less like a trophy and more like evidence of a crime. "This is quite the vessel," my father said, eventually attempting to regain some semblance of control through casual observation. "Your mother always did have expensive taste, though I wonder how she managed to afford something of this caliber without my knowledge." "She managed many things without your knowledge," I replied, "as you're beginning to discover." The barb landed. I saw him flinch, saw my stepmother's hand tighten on her wine glass. The politeness we were all performing was a thin mask, and everyone at the table knew it. They were planning something. I could see it in the glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. Whatever submission they had offered on the deck was temporary, a tactical retreat while they regrouped. I was prepared for that. I had been preparing for 2 years. The dining room door opened, and one of the security officers stepped inside. "Madam Campbell, there's a guest requesting permission to board. She says you're expecting her." Before I could respond, a figure appeared in the doorway behind him. She was perhaps 65, elegantly dressed in a cream-colored suit with silver hair swept back from a face that radiated controlled power. Her eyes swept the room, taking in my family with an expression of barely concealed contempt before settling on me. "Monica." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I believe it's time we had a proper conversation." I watched my family's reaction. My father had gone pale. My stepmother looked as if she might faint. And Emilia was staring at the woman with an expression of pure terror, as if she had seen a ghost. I rose from my seat as the woman entered, but before I could speak, another figure stepped into the dining room behind her. He was a man in his late 60s, tall and distinguished, wearing a charcoal suit that spoke of old money and older traditions. He carried a leather briefcase that looked as if it had seen decades of courtrooms and confidential meetings. His eyes, sharp and assessing, moved across the table before settling on my father with an expression I could only describe as professional disgust. "Monica Campbell," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Harrison Moore. I was your mother's personal attorney for 15 years, and I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." My father made a sound something between a gasp and a groan and gripped the edge of the table as if the room had suddenly tilted beneath him. My stepmother reached for him instinctively, her face draining of color. Whatever composure they had managed to maintain through dinner evaporated in an instant. "Harrison," my father's voice came out strangled. "I thought you retired. I thought you moved to Florida." "I allowed you to believe that," Harrison replied coolly. "It served Eleanor's purposes for you to think I was no longer involved in her affairs, but I made a promise to her before she died, and I intend to keep it." He turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. "Your mother was not only my client, Monica. She was one of the most remarkable women I've ever known. Protecting her legacy and protecting you has been my primary occupation for the past 14 years. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside were files folders and several items that looked like portable hard drives. He withdrew a thick manila envelope, its seal unbroken, and placed it before me. "Eleanor gave me this 6 months before she passed. She made me swear not to open it, not to deliver it until you were ready, until you had proven yourself capable of handling what it contains." He glanced at Captain Shaw and the elegant woman who had arrived first. I noticed now that she had taken a seat near the window, watching the proceedings with quiet intensity. "The captain tells me you've spent the past 2 years building your skills and learning the business. Mrs. Hawthorne confirms that you've exceeded every expectation. It's time." I broke the seal with steady hands, though my heart was pounding. Inside were documents, dozens of them, along with photographs, handwritten letters, and several USB drives labeled with dates spanning the final 3 years of my mother's life. "What you're holding," Harrison continued, "is a comprehensive record of the financial crimes committed against your mother's estate. transaction records showing unauthorized transfers from her accounts, correspondence proving that certain parties knew exactly what they were doing, and video recordings of meetings where Eleanor explicitly stated that her husband was illegally accessing her assets. I pulled out one of the documents, a bank transfer authorization dated 2 months before my mother's death. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably my father's handwriting, but the account it referenced was one of my mother's personal holdings. Below it was a notarized statement from a handwriting expert confirming that the authorization signature had been forged. "This isn't possible," my father said, but his voice was weak. "Eleanor gave me power of attorney. I had every right to manage her affairs when she became incapacitated." Harrison's expression hardened. "Eleanor never granted you power of attorney, Richard. I have the original documents in my possession, and none of them bear your name. What you've been operating under for the past 14 years is a forgery, a rather good one, I'll admit, but a forgery nonetheless." He withdrew another file. "I also have evidence that you attempted to alter the terms of Monica's trust fund when she was 12 years old, redirecting the accumulated interest to an account in your name. The bank flagged the transaction as suspicious and refused to process it, but the attempt itself constitutes fraud." My father's face had gone from pale to gray. He looked like a man watching his life collapse in real time. Each document another brick removed from the foundation of lies he had built over 3 decades. "You can't prove any of this," my stepmother interjected, her voice shrill with desperation. "These documents could be fabricated. You have no witnesses." "Actually, I have several." Harrison's calm was devastating. "Including your husband's former assistant, who helped him prepare the forged power of attorney and has since agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. And there are the video recordings." He gestured to one of the USB drives. Eleanor was meticulous about documentation. She recorded multiple conversations in which Richard explicitly discussed his plans to seize control of her assets once she was gone. She knew what was coming, and she prepared accordingly. I looked at my father. This man who had called me worthless, who had blamed me for my mother's death, who had thrown me out of my home with nothing but 2 suitcases and a lifetime of trauma. He couldn't meet my eyes. Now that Monica has reached the age of majority and demonstrated her capability, Harrison continued, "I have a legal duty to protect her inheritance from any party attempting to seize or diminish it. That includes family members, that includes business rivals, and that includes—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "A third party whose involvement I've detected in nearly every suspicious transaction surrounding Eleanor's estate." The room went very still. "What third party?" I asked. Harrison shook his head slowly. "That's what I haven't been able to determine. Someone was coordinating the attacks on your mother's business. Someone provided Richard with the contacts he needed to forge documents and manipulate accounts. Someone profited enormously from Eleanor's decline and death. Someone beyond Victoria Lane, beyond your father, beyond anyone whose name appears in these records." He looked at me with an expression that was almost apologetic. "Your mother suspected there was a puppet master behind everything, but she died before she could identify them. I've spent 14 years trying to finish what she started, and I'm closer now than I've ever been." The elegant woman by the window stirred, and I remembered that I still didn't know who she was or why my family had reacted to her with such fear. Harrison followed my gaze and nodded. "There's one more person coming tonight who you need to meet. Someone who knows the full truth about what happened to your mother and who has been waiting almost as long as I have to tell it." The words had barely left Harrison's mouth when the sound of engines cut through the evening air. Through the dining room windows, I watched a convoy of black vehicles pull onto the marina's private access road, 3 SUVs with tinted windows moving in perfect formation like a military escort. The dock workers stopped what they were doing to stare. Guests on neighboring yachts pressed against their railings for a better view. Even from this distance, I could sense the power radiating from that procession. "She's here," Harrison said quietly. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before, not fear exactly, but a wariness that made me understand this new arrival was not someone to be underestimated. The elegant woman by the window, Mrs. Hawthorne, I realized now, though she had aged considerably since her visit to my childhood home, rose and moved to stand beside me. Her hand found my elbow, a gesture of support that felt almost maternal. "Whatever happens next," she murmured, "remember who you are. Remember what Eleanor built for you. And remember that Victoria Lane has never defeated an opponent she couldn't intimidate first." The convoy stopped at the base of the pier. Security personnel emerged, first 6 of them, all in identical dark suits, all moving with the disciplined precision of former military. They scanned the area methodically before one of them opened the rear door of the middle vehicle. The woman who stepped out was striking in a way that transcended conventional beauty. She appeared to be in her mid-60s, with silver blonde hair swept into an immaculate chignon, and a face that had been carefully preserved through what I suspected was a combination of excellent genetics and expensive interventions. She wore a white silk blouse beneath a tailored black jacket, and diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, not ostentatiously large, but clearly worth more than most people earned in a year. Everything about her projected wealth, power, and absolute control. Victoria Lane had arrived. "Who is she?" I asked Harrison, though I already knew the answer. "Your mother's greatest rival," he replied, "and for a brief time her closest friend. Victoria and Eleanor came up together in the Boston real estate market. They were allies, once sharing information, collaborating on deals, supporting each other in an industry that wasn't kind to ambitious women. But that partnership ended badly." I watched Victoria stride down the pier, her security detail falling into step around her. Guests parted before her like water before the prow of a ship. No one attempted to greet her or engage her in conversation. They simply moved aside and stared. What happened between them? Victoria wanted to merge their companies. She proposed a partnership that would have created the largest real estate investment firm in New England. Eleanor refused. She didn't trust Victoria's methods. There were rumors of bribery, intimidation connections to people who operated outside the law. Eleanor believed that merging with Victoria would eventually destroy everything she had built. Harrison paused. "Victoria didn't take the rejection well. From that moment on, she viewed your mother as an enemy to be eliminated." Victoria had reached the gangway now. She exchanged words with the security officer stationed at the base, and I saw him speak into his radio. A moment later, Captain Shaw appeared at the dining room door. "Madam Campbell, Victoria Lane is requesting permission to board. She says she has business to discuss with you." My father made a strangled noise. "Don't let her on this yacht, Monica. You don't know what she's capable of. She'll destroy you the way she destroyed—" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he had said too much. "The way she destroyed whom?" I asked coldly. "My mother. The woman you've spent my entire life pretending was weak and helpless. The woman whose fortune you tried to steal." I turned back to the captain. "Grant her permission to board. Escort her to the main deck. I'll meet her there." I left the dining room without waiting for a response, Mrs. Hawthorne and Harrison following close behind. My father called after me a warning, a plea I couldn't tell, but I didn't look back. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted to face it standing in the open air with the harbor lights spread before me like a glittering audience. Victoria was waiting on the main deck when I arrived. Her security had positioned themselves at discreet intervals close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to allow for private conversation. She stood at the railing with her back to the water, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. When she saw me emerge from below, something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "My God," she said softly, "you look exactly like her." I stopped a few feet away, acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. This woman had nearly destroyed my mother. She had stolen properties, ruined reputations, and profited from tragedy. By every measure, she was my enemy. But there was something in her voice that didn't match the villain I had imagined, a complexity that made me hesitate. "And that's not good news for you," Victoria continued, her tone shifting to something harder. "Eleanor made the mistake of believing that intelligence and hard work would protect her from people who don't play by the rules. She was wrong. I hope you're smarter than she was." "I know what you did to her," I said. I have documentation of every property you stole, every deal you sabotaged, every lie you spread to destroy her reputation." Victoria's smile was thin and cold. "Documentation, evidence, legal proceedings." She waved a dismissive hand. "Your mother had all of that too, and look where it got her. Dead at 47, her empire in ruins, her daughter thrown out like garbage." She stepped closer, her eyes boring into mine. "You want to know the truth about what happened to Eleanor? The real truth, not the sanitized version Harrison Moore has been feeding you. I want to know everything. Then you need to understand something first." Victoria glanced toward the dining room where my family sat in terrified silence. "I wasn't your mother's only enemy. I wasn't even her most dangerous enemy. There were people working against her that she never identified, people who used me, used your father, used everyone around her as instruments of destruction." Her voice dropped. "People who are still out there, still watching, still waiting to finish what they started." The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel, and somewhere in the distance a bell buoy chimed its lonely rhythm. Victoria Lane stood before me, this woman I had hated without ever meeting, and offered me something I hadn't expected, the possibility that the truth was more complicated than I knew. "Let's talk privately, Monica," she said. "Before your family destroys you the way they destroyed her, I have something you need to hear." I didn't take Victoria up on her offer for a private conversation. Not yet. Whatever she wanted to tell me, I needed to hear it in front of witnesses, people who could verify her claims or expose her lies. Instead, I led her back to the dining room, where my family sat frozen in various states of terror, and my allies waited with carefully neutral expressions. "Harrison," I said as we entered, "you mentioned video recordings. I think it's time we all saw what my mother had to say." My father half rose from his chair. "Monica, this isn't necessary. Whatever Eleanor recorded, she was clearly not in her right mind toward the end. Her illness affected her judgment, made her paranoid." "Sit down, Richard." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip, and to my astonishment, my father obeyed. She settled into a chair at the far end of the table, crossing her legs with deliberate elegance. "Let the girl see what her mother left her. It's long overdue." Harrison withdrew a laptop from his briefcase and connected one of the USB drives. His movements were careful, almost reverential, as if he understood that what he was about to show me would change everything. He positioned the screen so everyone in the room could see, then pressed play. My mother's face filled the screen, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. She looked nothing like the woman in the photographs. I treasured those images of a vibrant, smiling woman holding a toddler version of me, her eyes bright with love and possibility. The woman in this video was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath papery skin, her once lustrous hair thin and brittle. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and there was a tremor in her hands as she adjusted the camera. But it was her expression that devastated me most. Exhaustion layered over fear, layered over a desperate, burning determination. "My name is Eleanor Mitchell Campbell," she began, her voice hoarse but steady. "I am recording this on March 15th, and I believe I don't have much time left. If you're watching this, Monica, then Harrison has determined that you're ready to know the truth. I'm so sorry, my darling. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you myself. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way a mother should." She paused to cough a deep, rattling sound that seemed to shake her entire frame. When she continued, her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I have been betrayed from every direction. My business rivals have spread lies about my mental competence, claiming I'm unfit to manage my own affairs. My husband, your father, has been working with them, providing information, signing documents I never authorized." Her voice cracked. "The man I married, the man I trusted to be your father, has been systematically stealing everything I built. He wants it all, Monica, and when I'm gone, he'll try to take it from you too." The video cut to a different scene, same room, different angle, clearly recorded on a different day. My mother sat at a desk covered with papers, while my father stood over her, his face contorted with rage. I had never seen him look like that, not even on the night he threw me out. This was something raw, something primal. "Sign the documents, Eleanor." His voice was barely controlled. You're too sick to manage the business anymore. Everyone can see it. Just sign the papers and let me handle things. I will never sign over my company to you." My mother's voice was weak but defiant. "I built Mitchell Properties from nothing. You had no part in it. You have no right to it." My father slammed his palm on the desk, scattering papers. "I have every right. I'm your husband. Everything you own is half mine under the law, and you've been hiding assets, moving money into accounts I can't access." He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. "You don't deserve to lead anything. You never did. You got lucky with a few investments, and you've been pretending to be some kind of business genius ever since. Well, I'm done pretending to respect you. Sign the papers, or I'll have you declared incompetent and take everything anyway. You'll never get my daughter's inheritance." My mother's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I've made sure of that. Monica will receive everything when she's old enough, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The hatred that twisted my father's features in that moment was something I recognized. It was the same expression he wore when he looked at me throughout my childhood. I finally understood he had hated my mother long before she died, and when she was gone, I became the vessel for all that poisonous resentment. The video shifted again, returning to my mother alone, speaking directly to the camera. She looked worse now, more fragile, as if the confrontation with my father had drained whatever reserves she had left. "Victoria Lane will try to take everything," she continued. "She's been circling my business like a vulture for years, waiting for me to weaken. I don't know if she's working with Richard or if they're operating separately, but either way, she's dangerous. Don't underestimate her, Monica. She's smarter than she appears and more ruthless than you can imagine." My mother leaned closer to the camera, her eyes burning with intensity despite her obvious exhaustion. "I feel like I'm being watched all the time. There's someone else involved in all of this, someone pulling strings that I can't see. Richard isn't smart enough to orchestrate everything that's happening to me. Victoria is cunning, but even she doesn't have the reach to attack me from so many angles at once. There's a third party, Monica, someone hiding in the shadows, someone who profits from everyone's destruction." She coughed again, longer this time, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "If you're watching this, my darling girl, then I've failed to protect you the way I wanted. But I've left you everything I could. Money, property, information, allies who will help you when the time comes. You must be stronger than I was, smarter, more careful." Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't trust anyone until you know the complete truth. Not your father, not Victoria, not even the people who claim to be your friends. The truth is buried deep, and everyone has reasons to keep it hidden." The video ended. The screen went dark. The dining room was silent except for the soft lapping of water against the hull. I became aware that I was crying, tears streaming down my face, grief and rage and love, all tangled together into something I couldn't name. My mother had known. She had known everything that would happen, and she had fought until her last breath to protect me. Victoria Lane rose from her chair and walked slowly toward me. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes that might have been respect. "Shall I tell you the part she didn't dare to record?" Victoria asked softly. "The part about what really killed her." The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand, refusing to show weakness in front of the woman who had helped destroy my mother's life. But Victoria's expression held none of the triumph I expected. Instead, she looked almost weary, as if the memories she was about to share carried a weight she had been bearing for far too long. "Before I became your mother's enemy," Victoria began, settling back into her chair with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I was her closest friend. We met at a real estate conference in 1987, two young women trying to break into an industry dominated by men who thought we belonged in secretarial pools. Eleanor was brilliant, anyone could see that within 5 minutes of talking to her, and I like to think I brought something to the table as well." She paused, her gaze drifting to the darkened windows, as if she could see the past reflected there. "We built our empires side by side. We shared information, warned each other about bad deals, celebrated each other's victories. When Eleanor married your father, I was her maid of honor. When I closed my first $1 million deal, Eleanor threw me a party that lasted until dawn. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Mrs. Hawthorne was part of our circle too. The three of us against the world. We were going to change everything. I glanced at Mrs. Hawthorne, who sat rigid in her chair, her face carefully blank. She hadn't mentioned this history, this intimate connection with the woman she had warned me against. Another piece of the puzzle I hadn't known existed. "What happened?" I asked. Victoria's expression hardened. "Your father happened. Richard Campbell saw an opportunity when he married Eleanor, a chance to attach himself to a rising star without doing any of the work himself. At first, Eleanor didn't see it. She was in love, or thought she was, and she wanted to believe the best in him. But over time, his true nature revealed itself. He resented her success. He hated that she was smarter than him, more respected, more powerful. And he began to poison everything he touched." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Including my friendship with your mother. Richard whispered in Eleanor's ear that I was trying to steal her clients, that I was spreading rumors about her business practices, that I wanted to destroy her. None of it was true, not at first, but Eleanor believed him. She pulled away from me, stopped returning my calls, began treating me as a rival instead of an ally." "So you decided to actually become her rival?" The bitterness in my voice surprised me. "I decided to protect myself." Victoria's tone was sharp. "When someone declares war on you, Monica, you don't have the luxury of remaining neutral. Your mother made decisions based on lies your father told her, and those decisions hurt people. My employees, my investors, families who depended on the projects she sabotaged. I fought back because I had to. You destroyed her reputation. You drove her out of the industry she helped build. I defended myself against attacks she launched first." Victoria stood and walked to the window, her silhouette framed against the harbor lights. "Your mother was not a Saint Monica. I know you want to believe she was a pure victim, an innocent woman destroyed by evil forces beyond her control. But the truth is more complicated than that." She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Eleanor made ruthless decisions when she felt threatened. She bought properties out from under me using insider information. She spread rumors about my company's financial stability that nearly caused a bank run on my credit lines. She poached my best employees with promises she couldn't keep, then let them go when they'd served their purpose." Victoria's voice softened. "I'm not saying she deserved what happened to her. I'm saying she wasn't innocent. None of us were." The dining room felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in as the narrative I had constructed over 32 years began to crack and shift. My mother, the martyr, the victim, the saint who had sacrificed everything to protect me, had also been a warrior who fought dirty when she had to. The realization didn't diminish my love for her, but it complicated everything I thought I understood. "If you were both attacking each other," I said slowly, "then who won? You're still here, still powerful. She's dead." "That's precisely my point." Victoria returned to the table, placing her palms flat on its polished surface. "Neither of us won, Monica. We spent years destroying each other while someone else profited from the chaos. Every contract we fought over, every property we tried to steal, every employee we poached, someone else was always there picking up the pieces we left behind." "The third party," I murmured, remembering my mother's warning in the video. "Your mother suspected it too toward the end. We actually spoke once about 6 months before she died, a secret meeting that your father never knew about. She told me she had evidence that someone was manipulating both of us, playing us against each other while harvesting the spoils. She wanted to call a truce, combine our resources, find out who was really pulling the strings. But you refused." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "I didn't believe her. I thought it was a trick, another manipulation, a way to get me to lower my guard. By the time I realized she was telling the truth, she was already dying, and it was too late to undo any of the damage." She looked at me with something that might have been regret. "I've spent 14 years trying to identify the person your mother warned me about. I've gotten close enough to know they're still active, still profiting from conflicts they create. But I haven't been able to prove anything." Mrs. Hawthorne spoke for the first time since Victoria's arrival. "Why are you telling her this now? What do you want?" Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want what Eleanor wanted before she died, to find the real enemy and destroy them. Monica has resources I need. She has legal standing to access records I can't touch, and she has something else that might prove even more valuable." "What's that?" I asked. Fresh eyes. A perspective unclouded by decades of suspicion and betrayal. Victoria straightened her posture, shifting into something more commanding. "Join me, Monica, and I'll help you destroy the real enemy. I'll share everything I know, open doors that have been closed to you, provide resources your mother could only dream of." Her eyes narrowed. "Refuse, and you'll be crushed like your mother was. You're already a target. The question is whether you want to face what's coming alone." I never got the chance to respond to Victoria's ultimatum. The words were still hanging in the air between us when the yacht lurched violently to starboard, sending glasses crashing to the floor and throwing several of us against the dining room walls. Through the windows I saw what had been a calm evening sky transform into something biblical, clouds the color of bruises rolling in from the Atlantic lightning, splitting the darkness in jagged white veins. "Storm came up fast," Captain Shaw said, bracing himself in the doorway. His voice was calm but urgent. "We need everyone to stay inside and away from the windows. The crew will handle—" The lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the dining room, broken only by the strobe-like flashes of lightning that illuminated frozen tableaus of terrified faces. I heard my stepmother scream, heard furniture scraping against the floor as people scrambled for something to hold on to, heard the wind howling like a living thing trying to tear the yacht apart. "Everyone stay calm," Harrison's voice cut through the chaos. "The backup generator should kick in any moment." But I couldn't stay calm. The darkness felt oppressive, suffocating, and some primal instinct screamed at me to get out to find open air to escape this confined space, where I couldn't see who was standing beside me. I fumbled my way toward where I remembered the door being, my hands brushing against walls and furniture, and once briefly against someone's arm. I found the exit and stumbled onto the main deck. The storm was even more terrifying out here, rain lashing horizontally, waves crashing against the hull with enough force to send spray 20 feet into the air, the yacht pitching and rolling like a toy in a bathtub. I grabbed the railing to steady myself, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself in the chaos. That's when I felt the hands on my back, two palms pressing hard between my shoulder blades, shoving me forward with vicious force. The railing hit my thighs, and my momentum carried me over, and suddenly I was falling, the black water rushing up to meet me, my scream torn away by the wind before it could fully form. My fingers caught something, a rope trailing from one of the deck fixtures, rough fibers burning my palms as my weight snapped against it. I swung like a pendulum, my legs dangling over the churning sea, rain streaming into my eyes and mouth. The waves reached for me hungrily, their spray soaking my clothes, their roar drowning out everything else. I tried to scream for help, but the wind stole my voice. I tried to pull myself up, but my arms were already trembling with the effort of simply holding on. This is how I die, I thought, with strange clarity. Thrown from my own yacht by someone who couldn't even face me in the light. But I didn't die. My fingers held. My arms, strengthened by 2 years of proving myself in ways both physical and psychological, refused to surrender. I clung to that rope with everything I had while the storm raged around me and the sea demanded my submission. Lights flickered on the backup generators, finally engaging, and I heard shouting above me, saw figures rushing to the railing, felt strong hands grabbing my wrists and hauling me upward. I collapsed onto the deck, coughing salt water, shaking uncontrollably alive. The first face I saw when I looked up was my father's. He stood at the railing perhaps 10 feet away, his expression frozen in what looked like genuine horror. His clothes were dry. He hadn't been out on deck when I fell, and his hands were empty, hanging uselessly at his sides. He looked like a man watching a car accident, paralyzed by the enormity of what was happening. But it was the second figure that made my blood run cold. My stepmother stood in the shadows near the doorway leading below deck. Unlike my father, she wasn't frozen. She was watching. And even through the rain, even in the flickering emergency lighting, I could see the expression on her face, cold satisfaction barely concealed beneath a mask of theatrical concern. "Monica!" She rushed forward, her voice pitched high with false worry. "Oh my God, are you all right? What happened? Did you slip?" I stared at her, water dripping from my hair, my chest heaving. I knew. In that moment, with absolute certainty, I knew who had pushed me. Captain Shaw took charge immediately. "Get her inside. Someone bring blankets. And I want to see the security footage from the past 15 minutes. All cameras, all angles." The next hour passed in a blur of warm blankets, hot tea, and quiet conversations conducted in urgent whispers. I sat in the main salon wrapped in a cashmere throw that probably cost more than my first car, while security personnel huddled around a laptop, reviewing footage from the yacht's surveillance system. My father sat across from me, silent and ashen. My stepmother had positioned herself beside him, her hand on his arm, playing the supportive wife with practiced ease. It was one of Victoria's security officers who found it. "Here," he said, turning the laptop so everyone could see. "Deck camera, 3x stamp 2147. The footage was grainy, washed out by the storm, but clear enough. It showed me stumbling onto the deck, grabbing the railing for support. And it showed my stepmother emerging from the doorway behind me, looking around quickly to ensure no one was watching, then crossing the distance between us in 3 quick strides. The push was deliberate, calculated. Her hands connected with my back, and she shoved with her full body weight, sending me over the railing with the kind of force that could only come from genuine hatred. "That's not," my stepmother began, but her voice faltered as every eye in the room turned to her. "The footage is doctored. Someone manipulated it. I would never—" "Play it again," I said quietly. They played it again, and a 4th time zoomed in on her face as she pushed me, capturing the expression of savage determination that twisted her features. "You tried to kill me," I said. The words came out flat, almost conversational. I was too exhausted for rage, too drained for anything but cold, hard truth. "You pushed me into the ocean during a storm, hoping I would drown." My stepmother's mask crumbled. The concerned wife, the supportive family member, the woman who had played her role so carefully for so many years, all of it fell away, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "You deserve to die!" she screamed, lurching to her feet. Security officers moved to restrain her, but she kept screaming, her voice raw with decades of suppressed hatred. "You were supposed to be gone. You were supposed to disappear and never come back. Everything was arranged. Everything was planned, and then you show up here with your lawyers and your documents and your self-righteous mother's ghost." "Patricia," my father's voice was barely a whisper, "stop talking." But she was beyond stopping. "You want to know why I hate you, Monica? Because you're a reminder. Every time I look at you, I see her. Eleanor perfect. Eleanor, the woman who stole everything from me." I turned to my father. "Are you going to say anything your wife just tried to murder me?" He couldn't meet my eyes. His silence filled the room louder than any words could have been. He had watched the footage. He knew what his wife had done. And still he said nothing. Still he chose her over me. My stepmother laughed a wild, unhinged sound. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think your precious mother told you all her secrets." She leaned forward against the security officers holding her, her eyes blazing. "You have no idea what secrets I'm protecting. Ask your father who Amelia's real mother is." "Go on, ask him." The room seemed to contract around my stepmother's words, as if the very air had been sucked out by the gravity of what she had just revealed. Amelia, who had been sitting in horrified silence throughout the confrontation, slowly rose from her chair. Her face was the color of chalk, her hands trembling at her sides. "What did you say?" Amelia's voice was barely audible. "What do you mean, my real mother?" My stepmother's expression shifted from manic triumph to something approaching fear, as if she had suddenly realized she had gone too far. She pressed her lips together and shook her head, refusing to say more. My father remained frozen, a man caught in the headlights of an oncoming disaster he had spent decades trying to avoid. Harrison Moore cleared his throat. "Perhaps this would be an appropriate time to read another section of Eleanor's will." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew the thick document I had seen earlier, flipping through pages until he found what he was looking for. There's a passage here that Eleanor specifically requested be read if certain questions arose about family relationships. "Don't," my father said. It was the first word he had spoken since the footage of my stepmother's attack played on the screen. "Harrison, I'm asking you don't read that. I'm afraid I don't take orders from you, Richard." Harrison's voice was ice. "I take orders from Eleanor Campbell, and her instructions were very clear." He adjusted his glasses and began to read. "To whoever may be present when this truth is finally revealed, I write the following with a heavy heart but a clear conscience. Amelia Grace Campbell is not my biological daughter. She is the child of my husband, Richard Campbell, and a woman named Patricia Holloway, the same woman who I suspect will eventually become his second wife after my death." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the distant rumble of the retreating storm, the creak of the yacht settling in the calmer waters, the ragged breathing of everyone in the room. Harrison continued reading. "Richard and Patricia had a relationship before our marriage, which resulted in Amelia's birth. When Patricia proved unwilling or unable to care for the child, Richard brought Amelia to me and begged me to raise her as my own. I agreed because I believed every child deserves love regardless of the circumstances of their birth. I raised Amelia with all the affection I would have given my own daughter, though Richard made it increasingly difficult by poisoning her mind against me and against Monica." I looked at Amelia. She stood motionless, tears streaming down her face, her world collapsing around her with every word Harrison spoke. "My husband always feared this truth would be exposed," Harrison read. "He overcompensated by favoring Amelia in every visible way, trying to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that she was his legitimate heir. But his guilt manifested in cruelty toward Monica, my biological daughter. He couldn't look at Monica without being reminded of me of his betrayal of the lies upon which our entire family was built. I have protected this secret for many years, not for Richard's sake, but for Amelia's. She was an innocent child who deserved a stable home. I only hope that when this truth emerges, she will understand that my love for her was genuine, even if nothing else in her life was." Harrison lowered the document. The dining room felt like a courtroom. After a devastating verdict, everyone present, everyone implicated, no one able to speak. The pieces were finally falling into place, assembling themselves into a picture so twisted and so clear that I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it before. My father had favored Amelia because she was his child with the woman he truly loved, or at least the woman who had given him what he really wanted, a daughter untainted by Eleanor's superior success. He had resented me because I was my mother's child, a living reminder of the wife who had outshone him in every way. And my stepmother Patricia had despised me from the moment she re-entered our lives because I represented the woman who had replaced her, the woman who had raised her abandoned daughter, the woman who had everything Patricia believed should have been hers. "You left me," Amelia whispered, her eyes fixed on my stepmother, her mother. "You had me, and you left me with strangers." Patricia struggled against the security officers holding her, her face contorting with something between anger and desperation. "I was young. I wasn't ready to be a mother. Your father promised he would take care of you, promised we would be together eventually. You abandoned me." Amelia's voice grew stronger, harder. "And then you came back and pretended to be my stepmother. You watched me grow up calling another woman Mom, and you never said a word. I couldn't. Richard said we had to wait, said it would destroy everything if the truth came out." "The truth?" Amelia laughed bitterly. "What truth? That my entire life has been a performance, that the woman who raised me, who loved me, who I've spent years believing abandoned the family, she was the only one who ever actually cared about me." She turned to our father, her father the only parent we truly shared, and the look on her face was something I recognized. It was the look of someone whose entire foundation had just crumbled beneath their feet. I had worn that expression myself 14 years ago when I walked out of our family home with 2 suitcases and no idea how I would survive. "You told me Monica killed our mother," Amelia said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You told me she was selfish and greedy, that she drove Mom to an early grave with her constant demands. You made me hate my own sister for something she never did." My father said nothing. His face had gone gray, his shoulders slumped, his carefully constructed authority demolished by the weight of his own lies. "But Mom didn't abandon me, did she?" Amelia continued, stepping closer to him. "Mom loved me. Mom raised me when my real mother couldn't be bothered. And you—" her voice broke. "You let me believe horrible things about the only person who actually cared whether I lived or died." She turned to face Patricia, who had stopped struggling against the security officers and now stood limp in their grip, all her venom drained away. "You're my mother," Amelia said. The words came out flat, empty of the emotion they should have carried. "My biological mother is standing right there, and she just tried to murder my sister." She looked back at our father. "You told me Monica killed our mother, but our mother is standing right there, isn't she? The woman who gave birth to me and then threw me away like garbage." My father finally spoke, his voice cracked and hollow. "Amelia, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." Amelia wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and when she looked at me, I saw something I had never seen before in her eyes. Recognition. Not love, not forgiveness. We were far from that, but the beginning of understanding. Monica was telling the truth all along, about everything. Amelia's words hung in the air like the final note of a funeral hymn. The room had fractured into pieces, my father slumped in his chair like a puppet with cut strings, Patricia restrained by security, and finally silent Amelia standing alone in the middle of the wreckage of everything she had believed about her life. Victoria Lane watched from her corner with the calculating stillness of a predator assessing wounded prey. And I sat wrapped in my blanket, still damp from my near drowning, trying to process revelations that kept coming like waves in the storm that had nearly killed me. Harrison Moore was the first to move. He reached into his briefcase, that seemingly bottomless repository of my mother's secrets, and withdrew another file. This one was thinner than the others contained in a plain manila folder that bore no labels or markings. He handled it with particular care, as if the pages inside were made of something fragile and dangerous. "There's one more document Eleanor entrusted to me," he said quietly. "She gave me strict instructions about when to reveal it. I was to wait until Monica had learned the truth about her inheritance about Victoria Lane and about her family's betrayals." He looked at me with an expression of profound sorrow. "She wanted you to be angry when you saw this, Monica. She wanted you to be ready to fight." He opened the folder and spread its contents on the table before me. Medical records, pages and pages of them covered in clinical terminology and doctors' signatures chronicling the final 18 months of my mother's life. These documents were compiled by a physician Eleanor trusted, a doctor outside the family's regular medical network, Harrison explained. She suspected something was wrong with her treatment and sought a second opinion in secret. What the doctor found was disturbing enough that Eleanor asked him to document everything and seal the records until after her death. I picked up the first page, my eyes scanning the dense medical language. Certain phrases jumped out at me, highlighted in yellow marker, by someone my mother perhaps, or Harrison himself. Signs of prolonged psychological stress, inconsistent with reported lifestyle. Medication levels suggesting dosage significantly higher than prescribed. Pattern of symptoms consistent with chronic sedative overuse. "I don't understand," I said, though a cold dread was already forming in my stomach. "What does this mean?" Harrison pointed to a section near the middle of the report. "Your mother was prescribed anti-anxiety medication by the family physician, a doctor who, it should be noted, was personally recommended by your father. The standard dosage should have helped manage stress without significant side effects, but these blood tests show concentrations nearly 3 times higher than what that dosage would produce." "Someone was giving her more than prescribed," Mrs. Hawthorne said softly, "enough to make her confused, disoriented, unable to manage her own affairs." "Enough to make her appear mentally unstable," Harrison confirmed, "which coincidentally was exactly what your father needed to support his petition for conservatorship. If Eleanor seemed incapable of managing her business, the courts might grant him control of her assets." I flipped through more pages, each one adding another layer to the horror. There were notes about appointments canceled without explanation, referrals to specialists that were never followed up on recommendations for additional testing that somehow got lost in the system. My mother had been systematically denied proper medical care while being simultaneously over-medicated into a state of helpless confusion. The official cause of death was heart failure, secondary to chronic illness, Harrison said, but the independent physician believed that diagnosis was at best incomplete. The stress of prolonged medication abuse, combined with the psychological trauma of watching her business be dismantled and her family turn against her, created conditions that accelerated her decline dramatically. I looked up at my father. He wouldn't meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance, his face the color of old newspaper. "You changed her medications," I said. It wasn't a question. He said nothing. "You had access to everything, the medicine cabinet, her doctors, her daily routine. You controlled what she ate, what she drank, what pills she took every morning and every night." My voice was rising, 14 years of suppressed grief and rage finally finding its outlet. "You drugged your own wife into submission so you could steal her company." "It wasn't like that." The words came out barely above a whisper. "I was trying to help her. She was paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere, refusing to trust anyone. I thought if she could just calm down, just rest." "You thought if you kept her sedated, she couldn't fight back when you took everything she had built." I stood, letting the blanket fall from my shoulders, no longer feeling the cold. "You didn't just steal from her. You killed her. Maybe not with your own hands, maybe not with a single decisive act, but you killed her just as surely as if you had pushed her overboard the way your wife tried to do to me." The medical records contained one more document, a handwritten note in my mother's increasingly shaky script, dated 3 weeks before her death. Harrison handed it to me without comment. "My darling Monica," I read aloud, my voice cracking. "If you are reading this, then I was right to be afraid. Someone is poisoning me, not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, steadily stealing my mind and my strength day by day. I don't know if it's Richard or Victoria or someone else entirely. I only know that I am dying, and not from natural causes. I have given Harrison everything I could gather as evidence. Use it to find the truth. Use it to protect yourself. And please, my darling girl, don't let them win. Don't let them erase me from history the way they're trying to erase me from life. I love you more than words can express. Be stronger than I was, be braver, and trust no one until you know who killed me." The note trembled in my hands. My mother had known. In her final weeks, trapped in a body that was failing her, and a mind clouded by medications she didn't know she was taking, she had still managed to gather evidence to plan for the future, to reach out across the years to the daughter she would never see grow up. "She prepared for everything," I whispered. "Even her own murder." Victoria Lane stirred in her corner. "Eleanor always was thorough," she said, and for once there was no venom in her voice. "Even when we were friends, she planned for contingencies most people never imagined." Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and I watched the color drain from his face. He read the message twice, his jaw tightening before looking up to meet my eyes. "We have a problem," he said grimly. "Arthur Prescott knows you have the medical records. He's demanding a meeting." The name landed in the room like a grenade. Arthur Prescott. I had never heard it before, but from the reactions around me, I could tell it carried a weight that made everything we had discussed so far feel like a prelude to something far more dangerous. Victoria Lane went rigid in her chair, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time since she had boarded the yacht. Mrs. Hawthorne pressed her hand to her chest, as if warding off a physical blow. Even my father, already diminished by the night's revelations, seemed to shrink further at the mention of the name. "Who is Arthur Prescott?" I asked. Harrison set down his phone and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose in a gesture of profound exhaustion. "Arthur Prescott is the answer to the question your mother spent her final years trying to solve. He's the third party, the puppet master, who has been manipulating everyone in this room for over 2 decades. Damn, he moved to the laptop that still displayed the frozen image of my stepmother pushing me overboard and pulled up a new file. A photograph appeared on the screen, a silver-haired man in his 70s, distinguished and elegant, photographed at what appeared to be a charity gala. His smile was warm, his eyes crinkled with apparent good humor, but there was something in his gaze that made my skin crawl, a predatory alertness that no amount of social polish could entirely disguise. Arthur Prescott built his fortune on destruction, Harrison continued. He identifies vulnerable companies, manufactures conflicts between their leadership, and then acquires the pieces at a fraction of their value after everyone has exhausted themselves fighting. He's done it dozens of times over the past 30 years, always staying invisible, always operating through proxies and shell companies. I don't understand, I said. What does he have to do with my mother? Victoria answered before Harrison could. Everything. Her voice was hollow. Arthur Prescott is the reason Eleanor and I became enemies. I know that now, though I didn't understand it at the time. She stood and walked to the window, her reflection ghostly against the dark glass. When Eleanor refused to merge her company with mine, I was disappointed, but not hostile. We had been friends. I could accept a professional disagreement. But then I started receiving information. Anonymous tips about deals Eleanor was supposedly stealing from me, clients she was poaching, lies she was spreading about my business practices. None of which was true, Mrs. Hawthorne added quietly. None of which was true, Victoria confirmed. But I believed it. The information was too detailed, too specific to be fabricated, or so I thought. I responded with attacks of my own, which Eleanor interpreted as unprovoked aggression. She retaliated. I escalated, and within 2 years we had destroyed a friendship that had taken a decade to build. She turned to face me. Arthur Prescott fed us both lies designed to turn us against each other. While we were busy tearing each other apart, he was quietly acquiring properties and contracts that we were too distracted to protect. Harrison pulled up more documents on the laptop, corporate filings, property transfers, financial records. Prescott Holdings made over $40 million during the years Eleanor and Victoria were at war. They bought distressed assets from both companies, often within days of a particularly damaging conflict. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. And my father? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Richard Campbell was one of Arthur's most useful tools. Harrison's voice dripped with contempt. Arthur identified him as the weak link in Eleanor's armor, a man whose ego couldn't tolerate being overshadowed by his wife. He cultivated Richard for years, feeding his resentment, providing him with contacts who could help him access Eleanor's assets, even recommending the physician who would later prescribe Eleanor's medications. The physician who had over-medicated my mother into confusion and helplessness. The physician who had helped create the conditions for her death. Arthur Prescott didn't just profit from my mother's destruction, I said slowly. He orchestrated it. From the very beginning, Harrison nodded. And when Eleanor died and the Campbell family fortune passed into Richard's control, Arthur was there to help him invest it through channels that ultimately benefited Prescott Holdings. Your father has been hemorrhaging money for 14 years without realizing that most of it was flowing directly into Arthur's pockets. My father made a sound, something between a gasp and a moan, and buried his face in his hands. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. He had been a villain in my story for so long that I had never considered the possibility that he was also a victim, a puppet dancing on strings he couldn't see. But then I remembered my mother's medical records, her desperate final note, the years of cruelty he had inflicted on me, and my sympathy evaporated. What does Arthur want now? I asked. Why is he demanding a meeting? Because you've become a problem. Victoria returned to her seat, her expression grim. As long as the Campbell family fortune was in Richard's hands, Arthur could continue siphoning it at will. But now that you've claimed your inheritance, now that you have legal control over assets that were supposed to remain accessible to him, you've disrupted his entire operation. He needs to either bring you under his control or eliminate you as a threat. Like he eliminated my mother. Exactly like that. The weight of it all pressed down on me, the scope of the conspiracy, the decades of manipulation, the lives destroyed by a man I had never met. My mother Victoria, my father even Amelia, all of them had been pieces on Arthur Prescott's chessboard, moved and sacrificed according to his grand strategy. Speaking of Amelia, I realized with a start that I hadn't seen her since her confrontation with our father. The emotional devastation of learning her true parentage had been overwhelming. Perhaps she had retreated somewhere private to process the destruction of everything she thought she knew. I was about to ask someone to check on her when Captain Shaw appeared in the doorway. "Madam Campbell, I thought you should know, Miss Amelia asked to use the satellite phone in the communications room. She said she needed to contact a friend." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Did she say who?" "No, ma'am," but she seemed quite distressed. I assumed, given the circumstances, I was already moving, pushing past the captain and heading for the communications room. Mrs. Hawthorne called after me, but I didn't stop. Some instinct honed by years of betrayal and disappointment screamed that something was wrong. The communications room was empty when I arrived, but the satellite phone lay on the console, its screen still glowing with a recently ended call. I checked the number, an unlisted line that meant nothing to me, and felt my heart sink. Then I heard her voice drifting from the adjacent storage room, Amelia speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I'll get you what you need," she was saying. "The USB drives the medical records, everything Harrison brought. Just tell me what to do and I'll make sure you get it." A pause. Then, "Yes, I understand. 50% of everything transferred to accounts in my name. You promise?" Another pause, longer this time. "Fine. I'll do it tonight. Just make sure you keep your end of the deal, Mr. Prescott." I stood frozen outside the storage room, Amelia's words echoing in my ears like a death sentence. My sister, the girl I had pitied just moments ago, the victim of our father's manipulations, whom I had begun to see with new eyes, was selling me out to the man who had orchestrated our mother's destruction. The cycle of betrayal continued unbroken, passed down through our family like a genetic disease. I backed away silently, my mind racing through options. I could confront Amelia now, but that would alert Arthur Prescott that his plan had been discovered. Better to let her think she was operating in secret while I prepared countermeasures. I had learned something valuable tonight. Trust was a luxury I could not afford, not even with blood relatives. When I returned to the main salon, I found my father alone. The others had dispersed, Harrison conferring with Captain Shaw about security protocols, Mrs. Hawthorne resting in one of the guest cabins, Victoria Lane prowling the deck with her security detail. My father sat where I had left him, slumped in his chair like a man awaiting execution, staring at nothing. I closed the door behind me. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. "We need to talk," I said. "Just you and me. No lawyers, no witnesses, no more hiding behind other people's secrets." He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw him clearly, not as the terrifying authority figure of my childhood, not as the cruel patriarch who had cast me out, but as a small, frightened man whose lies had finally caught up with him. The transformation should have been satisfying. Instead, it just felt sad. "What do you want me to say, Monica?" His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "You have the documents. You have the recordings. You know everything." "I don't know everything. I know facts and figures, transactions and timestamps. What I don't know is why." I sat down across from him, close enough to see the broken capillaries in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. "Why did you hate us so much? Why did you destroy your own family?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, the words came slowly, as if each one cost him something precious. "I never meant for any of this to happen. When I married Eleanor, I thought I was getting a sweet, compliant woman who would support my career and raise my children. I didn't know she was building an empire behind my back. I didn't know she was smarter than me, more successful than me, more respected than me." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be overshadowed by your own wife, to attend parties where people look past you to talk to her, to read newspaper articles praising her genius while treating you like an afterthought? So you decided to tear her down. I decided to restore balance." He met my eyes and I saw a flash of the old defiance. A man should be the head of his household. A man should control his family's finances. Eleanor upset the natural order of things, and I corrected it. By drugging her, by isolating her, by convincing everyone she was mentally ill. He didn't deny it. The medication was supposed to calm her down, make her more manageable. I didn't realize how much it would affect her until it was too late. And by then, he shrugged a gesture so casual it made my stomach turn. By then, it was easier to let things continue than to admit what I had done. And me, Amelia? Were we just collateral damage in your war against your own wife? You were leverage. The word hung in the air, ugly and honest. Eleanor loved you more than anything. If I controlled you, I controlled her. And Amelia... He paused, something flickering across his face. Amelia was my insurance policy. My daughter raised to be loyal to me, positioned to inherit if anything happened to you. You never loved either of us. Love is a luxury for people who don't have empires to manage. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. I did what I had to do to survive. I told Amelia that you were dangerous, that you had contributed to Eleanor's illness, that you would destroy the family if given the chance. I told you that you were worthless, that you didn't deserve your mother's love, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention I threw your way. A bitter smile twisted his lips. I kept you both afraid, both dependent, both unable to unite against me. It worked perfectly for 18 years. The clinical way he described his manipulation, the systematic emotional abuse of 2 children, made me feel physically ill. This wasn't a man confessing his sins with remorse. This was a man reviewing his strategy with professional detachment, as if Amelia and I had been stocks in a portfolio rather than his daughters. I have one more question, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Did you kill my mother? The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. My father's expression shifted through several emotions, fear, calculation, something that might have been regret before settling into a mask of defensive indignation. I didn't kill anyone. Eleanor died of heart failure. It's documented. There was an autopsy. An autopsy performed by doctors you selected, a death certificate signed by the physician who had been over-medicating her for months. I leaned forward. I'm asking you directly, Father. Did you cause Eleanor Campbell's death? He couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze dropped to his hands, to the floor, to anywhere but my face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. She was weak. She couldn't handle the pressure, the business problems, the conflicts with Victoria, the stress of managing everything while her health declined. I may have contributed to her difficulties, but I didn't kill her. He looked up then, and I saw something cold and reptilian in his eyes. She couldn't handle the world I forced her to live in. That's not my fault. That's just nature, survival of the fittest. The words hit me like a physical blow. My mother, brilliant, strategic, loving, reduced to a casualty of social Darwinism by the man who had sworn to cherish her. He hadn't pulled a trigger or wielded a knife, but he had created the conditions for her destruction and watched her crumble without lifting a finger to help. In some ways, that was worse than outright murder. It was cowardice dressed up as inevitability. "You're a monster," I said quietly. "I used to think you were just cruel, just cold, just incapable of love. But you're so much worse than that. You're empty. There's nothing inside you but ambition and fear." My father opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut through the tension. "Now, do you finally see who the real monster is? Monica." Victoria Lane stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft lighting of the corridor behind her. "It was never me." Victoria's words lingered in the doorway, like an invitation and a challenge rolled into one. She stepped into the salon, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her eyes fixed on my father with an expression of undisguised contempt. Behind her, the corridor stretched into shadows, and I wondered how long she had been listening, how much of my father's confession she had witnessed. "I spent 15 years believing you were the victim of Eleanor's ambition," Victoria said to my father, her voice dripping with acid. "I thought she had manipulated you, used you, driven you to desperation. I defended your actions to people who called you weak, and all along you were the architect of her destruction." She shook her head slowly. "Richard Campbell, the grieving widower. What a performance." My father said nothing. He seemed to have exhausted his capacity for speech, for defense, for anything except sitting in that chair and waiting for judgment to fall. I stood and walked to the window, needing distance from both of them, while I processed the avalanche of information that had buried me over the past several hours. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind a sky scattered with stars and a sea as smooth as black glass. The contrast between that peaceful scene and the chaos inside the yacht felt almost absurd. Victoria was dangerous. That much was certain. She had spent years attacking my mother's business, spreading lies, stealing assets. Her claim that she had been manipulated by Arthur Prescott might be true, but it didn't absolve her of the harm she had caused. Even now, standing in my salon offering sympathy and solidarity, I could sense the calculation behind her eyes. Victoria Lane didn't form alliances out of kindness. She formed them out of strategy. My father was cruel, but perhaps not entirely in control of his own cruelty. Arthur Prescott had cultivated him, guided him, used him as a weapon against the wife who threatened to outshine them both. Did that make my father less culpable? I didn't think so. He had made choices. Conscious, deliberate choices to harm my mother and to abuse his daughters. Whatever manipulation Arthur had employed, my father had been a willing participant in his own corruption. And Arthur Prescott himself remained a shadow, a name attached to documents and transactions, but not yet a face I had confronted. The puppet master pulling strings from behind a curtain I couldn't see through. He had destroyed my mother, manipulated Victoria, corrupted my father, and now he was reaching out to Amelia, offering her the same poisoned fruit he had offered everyone else in my family. Everyone wanted something from me. My father wanted forgiveness, or at least escape from consequences. Victoria wanted an ally against Arthur. Amelia wanted money and status, the things she had been promised her whole life. Even Harrison and Mrs. Hawthorne, for all their genuine care, had their own agendas, loyalty to my mother's memory, perhaps, or the satisfaction of seeing justice finally served. Who could I trust? The question circled through my mind like a vulture over carrion. Monica. Victoria's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She had moved closer while I was distracted, and now stood just a few feet away, her expression softened into something almost approaching warmth. I know you have no reason to trust me. After everything you've learned tonight, I wouldn't trust me either. But Arthur Prescott is a threat to both of us. He destroyed your mother and he used me to do it. He's been bleeding your family's fortune for 14 years, and he won't stop until he's taken everything. What are you proposing? An alliance. She spread her hands, a gesture of openness that I didn't believe for a second. I have resources. Financial, legal, political. I have connections that can get us information about Arthur's operations, evidence that could bring him down. And you have something equally valuable, legal standing. You're the sole heir to Eleanor's estate. You can access records, challenge transactions, initiate investigations that I could never pursue on my own. It was a compelling offer. With Victoria's resources and my legal authority, we could mount a formidable attack against Arthur Prescott. We could expose his manipulations, recover the assets he had stolen, perhaps even see him face criminal charges for his role in my mother's death. The thought of that justice was intoxicating. But I had watched Victoria Lane operate tonight. I had seen how she entered a room expecting to dominate it, how she calculated every word for maximum effect, how she positioned herself as an ally while carefully preserving her own interests. If I joined forces with her, I would become a tool in her arsenal, useful for as long as I served her purposes, discardable the moment I didn't. My mother had warned me in her final video trust, "No one until you know the complete truth." And the complete truth was something I still didn't have. "No," I said. Victoria's carefully maintained expression flickered with surprise. "No. I appreciate the offer, but I decline." I turned to face her, fully squaring my shoulders, drawing on every ounce of strength I had developed over 14 years of survival. "You're not interested in justice, Victoria. You're interested in winning. And if helping you win means sacrificing my own interests or becoming complicit in whatever methods you're willing to use, then I'll end up no better than the people who destroyed my mother." "Monica, be reasonable. You can't fight Arthur Prescott alone. He has more money, more connections, more experience than you can possibly. I didn't say I would fight alone. I glanced toward the door where Mrs. Hawthorne had appeared, drawn by our voices. But I will choose my own allies, fight my own battles on my own terms. If that means taking longer to bring Arthur down, so be it. At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror when it's over. Victoria's mask of warmth evaporated, replaced by something colder and more honest. You're making a mistake. Arthur Prescott has destroyed everyone who has stood against him alone. Your mother, dozens of other business leaders over the years. What makes you think you'll be any different? Because I'm not alone. I just won't be allied with you. I met her gaze without flinching. My mother spent her final years preparing me for this moment. She left me evidence, resources, people she trusted, and unlike you, those people don't have decades of betrayal to answer for. The tension between us stretched taut as a violin string. Victoria studied me with those calculating eyes, reassessing, recalculating, adjusting her strategy to account for this unexpected resistance. Before she could respond, a crew member burst through the door, slightly out of breath. "Madam Monica, I apologize for the interruption, but the captain asked me to find you immediately." He paused to catch his breath. "We found something hidden in your mother's private cabin, a concealed compartment behind the bulkhead, that wasn't in any of the ship's original blueprints. There's a safe inside, and it has your name engraved on it. The captain believes it was meant only for your eyes." I followed the crew member through the yacht's corridors, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Victoria called after me, demanding to know what was happening, but I didn't stop to explain. Whatever my mother had hidden in that cabin had waited 14 years to be discovered. It could wait a few more minutes for Victoria Lane's curiosity to be satisfied. The private cabin was located on the lower deck, accessible through a door marked with a small brass plaque that read EMC, my mother's initials. Captain Shaw stood outside, his weathered face solemn in the dim lighting. "We discovered it during a routine inspection after the storm," he explained, leading me inside. The bulkhead panel was slightly warped by the humidity, and one of my crew noticed it didn't sit flush with the wall. When we investigated, we found this. He gestured towards the far wall where a section of mahogany paneling had been removed to reveal a steel safe embedded in the yacht's structure. The safe was small, perhaps 18 inches square, and bore a digital keypad alongside a traditional lock. Engraved on its surface in elegant script was my name, Monica Eleanor Campbell. "Do you have any idea what the combination might be?" Captain Shaw asked. I studied the keypad, thinking about my mother, about the way her mind worked, about the patterns she had woven throughout my life. She had planned everything with such care, the trust documents, the timing of the revelations, the evidence she had scattered like breadcrumbs for me to follow. Whatever combination she had chosen would be something meaningful, something I would recognize. I tried my birthday first. The keypad beeped once, rejecting the code. Then I tried her birthday. Another rejection. I closed my eyes, reaching back through memories I had tried to suppress for 14 years. My mother sitting with me on my bed, reading stories before sleep. My mother teaching me to bake cookies on a rainy Saturday afternoon. My mother whispering that she loved me as she tucked me in her voice, soft and warm in the darkness. And then I remembered a number she had made me memorize when I was very young, telling me it was our special secret. I had thought it was a game at the time. Now I understood it was one more piece of her master plan. I entered the number. The safe clicked open. Inside was a wooden box, aged but well preserved, along with several manila envelopes and a leather-bound journal. I lifted the box out carefully and set it on the cabin's small desk, aware of Captain Shaw and Mrs. Hawthorne watching from the doorway. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a photograph. Two women stood arm in arm on what appeared to be a rooftop terrace, the Boston skyline glittering behind them in the evening light. They were both young, perhaps in their early 30s, and they were both smiling with the unguarded joy of genuine friendship. One of them was unmistakably my mother, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes bright with happiness. The other was Victoria Lane. I had known intellectually that they had once been close. Victoria had told me as much just hours ago. But seeing the proof of it, seeing my mother's arm wrapped around the waist of the woman who would later help destroy her, made the tragedy feel suddenly viscerally real. They had loved each other once. They had trusted each other, and someone had deliberately torn that bond apart. There were more photographs beneath the first, my mother and Victoria, at various events, at dinners, at what looked like a beach vacation. There were also documents, contracts, letters, financial statements that I would need time to examine properly. But it was the journal that drew my attention most strongly. I opened it to the first page and saw my mother's handwriting, the familiar loops and curves that I remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists, and the letter she had left me when she died. If you're reading this, Monica, then you've found my final hiding place. Everything I couldn't risk putting in the official documents is here. The truth about Arthur Prescott. The truth about what happened between Victoria and me. The truth about what I believe your father has been doing to me. Read it all, understand it all, and then do what I couldn't bring them to justice. My throat tightened. Even in death, my mother was guiding me, protecting me, arming me for battles she had known I would have to fight. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped closer, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Eleanor always said that necklace contained a piece of her heart. I thought she meant it metaphorically. The necklace. I had almost forgotten about it in the chaos of the evening. I lifted it from around my neck. I had put it on after the captain gave it to me, wanting to keep my mother close, and examined it more carefully. The locket's surface was smooth, unremarkable, but I remembered noticing earlier that there seemed to be a hidden compartment within the compartment. I pressed my thumbnail into the tiny seam I had detected before applying gentle pressure while rotating the locket's face. There was a soft click, and a section of the back panel popped open to reveal a cavity I hadn't noticed before, a space barely large enough to hold a fingernail. Inside was a micro USB drive, so small it was nearly invisible against the gold interior. She hid it perfectly, Mrs. Hawthorne breathed. No one would ever think to look there. I held the tiny device up to the light, marveling at my mother's foresight. She had concealed her most crucial evidence in the one place no one would think to search a piece of jewelry that appeared to be nothing more than sentimental keepsake. Captain Shaw produced a laptop, and I inserted the USB drive with hands that shook despite my efforts to control them. The drive contained a single folder labeled with a date from 3 months before my mother's death. Inside were audio files, dozens of them, each one time-stamped and labeled with cryptic identifiers. I clicked on the first recording. My mother's voice filled the cabin, slightly distorted by the recording quality, but unmistakably hers. Victoria, I'm telling you, someone is feeding us false information. The deal you accused me of stealing, I never even knew about it until you confronted me. Someone wanted us to fight. Victoria's voice responded, younger but recognizable. Eleanor, I have documents with your signature authorizing the acquisition. How do you explain that? I can't explain it because I didn't sign them. Someone forged my name, Victoria. Someone who wanted us at each other's throats. Then a third voice entered the recording, a man's voice, smooth and cultured, with an undertone of amusement that made my skin crawl. Ladies, there's no need for such hostility. I'm sure we can find a solution that benefits everyone. That's Arthur Prescott, Mrs. Hawthorne whispered. I'd recognize that voice anywhere. I clicked through more recordings, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle. Arthur positioning himself as a mediator while secretly inflaming the conflict. Arthur suggesting strategies to Victoria that would damage my mother's business. Arthur advising my mother to retaliate in ways that would hurt Victoria. He had played both sides with masterful precision, profiting from every battle while appearing to be a neutral friend to both. The final recording was dated 2 weeks before my mother's death. Her voice was weaker now, strained with illness and exhaustion, but I could hear her fighting to stay alert as she confronted Arthur directly. I know what you've been doing, she said. I have proof, and when I recover, I'm going to expose everything. Arthur's response was chilling in its casual menace. Eleanor, you're not going to recover. We both know that. And once you're gone, everything falls to us. A pause then. Make sure it looks natural. The recording ended, leaving Arthur Prescott's words hanging in the air like a death sentence delivered 14 years too late. Make sure it looks natural. My mother had captured her own murderer confessing to his crime, and she had hidden that confession where only I would ever find it. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of what I held pressing down on me. This was more than evidence of financial manipulation or business fraud. This was proof of conspiracy to commit murder. Arthur Prescott had orchestrated my mother's death, and he had done it with the cold calculation of a man disposing of an inconvenient obstacle. "We need to take this to the authorities," Harrison said from the doorway. I hadn't noticed him arrive, but he had clearly heard enough of the recordings to understand their significance. "The FBI, the SEC, whoever has jurisdiction over, before you do anything." Victoria's voice cut through the cabin like a blade. "There's something you need to know." She pushed past Harrison, her composure fractured in a way I hadn't seen all evening. Gone was the calculating businesswoman who had offered me alliances and issued veiled threats. In her place stood someone rawer, more vulnerable, driven by emotions she had spent decades trying to bury. Her eyes weren't fixed on me or Harrison or Captain Shaw. They were locked on Mrs. Hawthorne, who had gone very still beside the desk, her face draining of color. "Victoria," Mrs. Hawthorne said softly, "please, not like this." "Not like this." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness aged like wine into something toxic. "There's no good way to say this, Mother. There never has been." The word landed in the cabin with the force of an explosion. "Mother." I looked between the two women, searching for resemblance, for connection, for some sign that I had missed, and suddenly I saw it: the shape of their eyes, the line of their jaws, the way they both held themselves with rigid posture when under stress. How had I not noticed it before? "Before you trust Eleanor Hawthorne completely," Victoria continued, turning to face me, "you should know the truth about who she really is. She's my mother, the woman who abandoned me when I was 3 years old to build her precious career, Mrs. Hawthorne, Eleanor Hawthorne." I realized sharing my mother's first name in a coincidence that now seemed anything but pressed her hand against the wall as if she needed support to remain standing. "Victoria, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you left me with your sister because a child didn't fit into your 5-year business plan. How you visited twice a year like I was some distant relative instead of your own daughter. How you built an empire while I grew up wondering why my mother didn't love me enough to keep me." The pain in Victoria's voice was devastating to witness. This wasn't the cold, calculating woman who had destroyed my mother's business. This was a wounded child still bleeding from a wound that had never healed, finally confronting the source of her deepest trauma. "I made a terrible mistake," Mrs. Hawthorne whispered. "I was young, I was ambitious. I thought I could have both a career and a family. But the industry was brutal to women in those days. If I had kept you with me, I would have been seen as distracted, uncommitted, unsuitable for leadership. I thought I was protecting your future by securing mine first." "You were protecting yourself," Victoria's voice cracked. "And when I finally clawed my way to success on my own, when I built my own empire without any help from you, do you know what I discovered? That you had found a new daughter to replace me. Eleanor Campbell, your best friend, your protégée, the brilliant young businesswoman you mentored and supported the way you never supported me." I looked at Mrs. Hawthorne with new eyes, seeing the layers of guilt and regret that I had mistaken for simple grief over my mother's death. She hadn't just lost a friend when my mother died. She had lost her chance at redemption, her opportunity to prove that she could be a good mother figure, even if she had failed her own child. "And then there was Monica." Victoria continued, her gaze shifting to me. "Eleanor's daughter, the grandchild you never had. I watched you take her in, guide her, prepare her to inherit everything. You gave her all the love and attention you never gave me." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Do you have any idea how that felt? To see you nurture someone else's child, while I spent my whole life starving for a single kind word from you?" The pieces were rearranging themselves in my mind, forming a picture I had never anticipated. Victoria Lane's ruthlessness, her willingness to destroy anyone connected to Mrs. Hawthorne, her particular venom toward my mother. It had never been purely about business. It had been about pain, rejection. the desperate fury of an abandoned child lashing out at everyone her mother chose over her. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Hawthorne said, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I've spent every day since Eleanor died trying to make amends, trying to save Monica the way I couldn't save you." "Save her." Victoria's laugh was hollow. "You're not saving her. You're using her the same way you used my mother's friendship, as a way to feel better about yourself, to convince yourself that you're not the monster who threw away her own child." I stepped between them, my mind reeling but my voice steady. "Victoria, I understand why you're angry. I understand why you hate her and why you hated my mother and why you've spent your life trying to punish everyone connected to the woman who abandoned you." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But right now, Arthur Prescott is out there planning his next move. He killed my mother. He manipulated all of us, including you. Whatever happened between you and Mrs. Hawthorne, whatever wounds you're both carrying, we can't let him win." Victoria stared at me, her chest heaving with emotion. For a moment I thought she might scream, might attack Mrs. Hawthorne, might storm off the yacht and disappear into the night. But slowly, gradually, I watched her reassemble her composure, brick by brick, until the calculated businesswoman stood before me once again. "You're right," she said finally. "Arthur is the real enemy. He used my pain, my anger, my desperate need for someone to blame. He pointed me at your mother like a weapon and pulled the trigger." She straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair. "We can settle family business later. Right now we have a monster to destroy." My phone rang, the sound jarring in the emotional aftermath of Victoria's revelation. I glanced at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. The caller ID read Arthur Prescott, private line. I stared at the phone in my hand, the name on the screen pulsing like a heartbeat. Arthur Prescott, the puppet master, the man who had orchestrated my mother's destruction and then recorded himself ordering her death as casually as one might order dinner. He was calling me directly, reaching out from the shadows he had inhabited for 2 decades. "Answer it," Victoria said quietly. "Let's hear what he has to say." I pressed the accept button and raised the phone to my ear. "This is Monica Campbell." "Miss Campbell." The voice was exactly as I remembered from the recording, smooth, cultured, with that undercurrent of amusement that made my skin crawl. "I've been watching the events on your yacht this evening with great interest. You've had quite a busy night. How do you know what's happening on my yacht?" "I make it my business to know everything, Miss Campbell, especially when it concerns assets I've been managing for the past 14 years. He paused, letting the implication sink in. "I think it's time we met face to face. I'm aboard my vessel, the Sovereign, anchored about half a mile from your position. I'll send a tender to collect you in 30 minutes. "Why would I agree to meet with you?" "Because you're a smart woman, and smart women don't start wars without understanding their enemies." Another pause. "And because I have information about your mother's final days that even Harrison Moore doesn't possess. Information I think you'll find very illuminating." The line went dead before I could respond. I looked at the faces surrounding me: Victoria, Mrs. Hawthorne, Harrison, Captain Shaw. They had all heard Arthur's side of the conversation through the phone's speaker. "It's a trap," Harrison said immediately. "He's trying to get you alone, away from your security, away from witnesses." "Probably," I agreed. "But he's also right. I need to understand who I'm fighting, and the only way to do that is to look him in the eye." 30 minutes later, I was seated in a tender boat cutting through the dark water toward a yacht that made mine look modest by comparison. The Sovereign was a floating palace, easily 300 feet long, blazing with lights that reflected off the calm sea like scattered diamonds. Armed security personnel lined its deck, watching our approach with the alert stillness of trained professionals. Arthur Prescott met me at the top of the gangway. In person, he was exactly what the photographs had suggested: a distinguished man in his 70s, silver hair swept back from a face that radiated patrician confidence. His eyes were the most striking feature, pale blue, almost colorless, with the flat effect of a predator assessing prey. He wore a cream-colored dinner jacket over a black shirt, and when he extended his hand in greeting, I noticed the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist probably cost more than most people earned in a year. "Miss Campbell, thank you for accepting my invitation." His handshake was firm and brief. "Please come inside. We have much to discuss." He led me through corridors decorated with original artwork and museum-quality antiques, past uniformed staff who moved with the silent efficiency of well-trained servants, into a study that overlooked the stern deck through floor-to-ceiling windows. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace, despite the summer warmth, and crystal decanters gleamed on a sideboard that looked older than the country itself. "Brandy," Arthur offered, pouring himself a measure without waiting for my response. "It's a 1945 Hennessy. Your mother had excellent taste in cognac, one of many things I admired about her." "You admired her so much that you had her killed." Arthur smiled, settling into a leather armchair with the ease of a man who had never known physical discomfort. "Directly to business. I appreciate that. Your mother was the same way, no patience for social niceties when there was work to be done." He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. "I won't insult your intelligence by denying what you've obviously discovered. Yes, I orchestrated the conflict between Eleanor and Victoria. Yes, I profited enormously from their mutual destruction. And yes, when your mother became inconvenient, I arranged for her to be removed from the equation." The casual admission of murder should have shocked me, but I had already heard it in his own voice on the recordings. What shocked me was the complete absence of remorse the way he discussed my mother's death, as though it were a minor business decision, a line item on a balance sheet. "Why?" I asked. "You were already wealthy. You had power, influence, everything a man could want. Why destroy two women who had never done anything to you?" "Because they had something I wanted." Arthur swirled his brandy, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. "Eleanor and Victoria, working together, controlled nearly 40% of the commercial real estate market in New England. Separately, they were successful. United, they would have been unstoppable. I couldn't allow that, not because they threatened me directly, but because their success would have constrained my own expansion plans." He shrugged. "Business is war, Miss Campbell. Your mother understood that. She simply wasn't ruthless enough to win." "She was ruthless enough to document everything you did. She was ruthless enough to hide evidence that you're now terrified I'll use against you." "Terrified?" Arthur laughed softly. "My dear girl, I'm not terrified of anything. I invited you here because I respect your potential and because I believe we can reach an arrangement that benefits us both." I felt the trap closing around me, but I needed to hear his offer to understand his strategy. "What kind of arrangement?" Arthur set down his brandy and leaned forward, his pale eyes fixed on mine with unnerving intensity. "I'm 73 years old. I've spent 50 years building an empire, but I have no heir, no protege, no one capable of continuing my work after I'm gone. You, Miss Campbell, have proven yourself to be intelligent, resilient, and strategically minded. You've uncovered secrets that should have remained buried forever. That kind of capability is rare and valuable. You want me to work for you. I want you to inherit my empire." He smiled at my surprised expression. "Not immediately, of course. You would need years of training, guidance, mentorship. But eventually, everything I've built could be yours, including the assets I've accumulated from your mother's estate and others. You would be one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the country." Now, the offer hung in the air between us, glittering with poisonous promise. I thought about what it would mean to accept unlimited resources, unimaginable power, the ability to reshape the world according to my will. For a moment, just a moment, I understood how my father must have felt when Arthur first approached him offering shortcuts to everything he desired. But I also understood what accepting would cost me: my integrity, my mother's memory, my soul. "My mother received a similar offer, didn't she?" I said quietly. "You approached her years before the conflict with Victoria, offering partnership, guidance, mentorship, and she refused." Arthur's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Eleanor was idealistic. She believed in principles over pragmatism. It was her greatest weakness. It was her greatest strength." I stepped back from his chair, putting distance between us. "Mrs. Hawthorne taught me something important. Power without integrity destroys itself. You might have won every battle you fought, Mr. Prescott, but look around you. You're alone on this floating monument to your own ego, surrounded by employees who serve you out of fear rather than loyalty. You have no friends, no family, no one who would mourn you if you died tonight. Is that winning?" Arthur's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those pale eyes, a flicker of something that might have been recognition, or might have been the first stirring of genuine anger. "Your mother said something similar," he replied, his voice dropping to something colder. "She spoke about legacy and meaning and the importance of building something that would outlast her own ambition. Very noble sentiments." He rose from his chair, and suddenly the urbane host was gone, replaced by something predatory and dangerous. "She died anyway, Miss Campbell. All her principles, all her preparation, all her hidden evidence, none of it saved her. You'll be tested the same way she was. I wonder if you'll survive." The tender ride back to my yacht felt longer than the journey out. Arthur's final words echoed in my mind, a promise and a threat woven together with the skill of a man who had spent his life destroying people who underestimated him. I was barely aboard when the alarms began. Red lights flashed throughout the yacht's corridors, accompanied by a piercing electronic wail. Captain Shaw came running, his face grim. "Security breach!" he shouted over the noise. "Someone is attacking our financial systems, trying to drain every account connected to the trust." The yacht's control room had transformed into a war zone of flashing screens and urgent voices. Harrison hunched over a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard while sweat beaded on his forehead. Captain Shaw barked orders into a radio, coordinating with the yacht's security team. And on every monitor, I could see red warning messages cascaded down the screens like digital blood. "They're hitting everything simultaneously," Harrison reported without looking up. "The main trust accounts the investment portfolios, the property holding companies, even the Swiss accounts your mother thought no one knew about. Whoever designed this attack had complete knowledge of the entire financial structure." I thought of Amelia's phone call to Arthur Prescott, the one I had overheard hours ago. She had promised to get him what he needed. She must have provided him with the account information from the documents Harrison had brought aboard, documents she had access to during the chaos of the evening's revelations. "Can you stop it?" I demanded. "I'm trying." Harrison's voice was strained. "But they're using multiple attack vectors, rotating through different access points faster than I can block them. It's like fighting a hydra. Every time I close one vulnerability, 3 more open up." Victoria appeared at my shoulder, her face grim as she studied the screens. "This is Arthur's signature move. He did something similar to a competitor of mine 6 years ago, drained $40 million in under an hour, then used the chaos to acquire their distressed assets at pennies on the dollar. How do we stop him?" "You don't stop Arthur Prescott. You survive him." She pulled out her phone. "But I have people who might be able to slow him down. Give me 5 minutes." She stepped away to make her call, and I turned back to Harrison feeling helpless in a way I hadn't experienced since the night my father threw me out of our family home. Everything my mother had built, everything she had sacrificed to protect it, was being systematically dismantled while I watched, unable to do anything except bear witness to the destruction. My phone rang. Mrs. Hawthorne's number. "Monica." Her voice was weak, frighteningly so stripped of the quiet strength I had come to depend on. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you earlier, but I wasn't certain until today." "Mrs. Hawthorne, what's wrong? You sound—" "I've been poisoned." The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, as if she were reporting the weather. "Slowly, over the past several months, small doses of something the doctors are still trying to identify exactly what added to my food or my medication. I've been experiencing symptoms for weeks: fatigue, confusion, heart palpitations. I thought it was just age catching up with me, but this morning my physician ran additional tests and found toxic compounds in my blood." The room seemed to tilt around me. Who did this to you?" "A new housekeeper I hired 4 months ago. Excellent references, impeccable background check, all of it fabricated, I now realize. She disappeared yesterday, the same day the test results came back." Mrs. Hawthorne paused, and I heard her struggling to breathe. Arthur Prescott placed her in my household, Monica. He's been trying to kill me the same way he killed your mother, slowly, invisibly, in a way that could be blamed on natural causes. Rage ignited in my chest, white-hot and consuming. Arthur Prescott sat on his floating palace, sipping vintage brandy and orchestrating attacks on everyone I cared about. He had murdered my mother. He was trying to murder Mrs. Hawthorne. He was destroying my inheritance while I stood helpless, and he did it all with the calm detachment of a man swatting flies. "Are you going to survive?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "The doctors caught it in time. Barely. I'll need treatment monitoring, probably months of recovery." She coughed weakly. "But I'm not calling about me. I'm calling to warn you. If Arthur is attacking your finances and trying to eliminate me simultaneously, it means he's making his final move. He doesn't want witnesses, Monica. He doesn't want anyone left who can testify against him. I have the recordings, the USB drive from my mother's necklace. It proves everything. Then protect it with your life. That evidence is the only thing standing between Arthur and complete victory." Another cough, longer this time. "I have to go. The doctors need to run more tests. Be careful, Monica. Be smarter than I was. Be smarter than your mother was." The line went dead. I stood motionless, the phone still pressed to my ear, while the chaos of the cyber attack swirled around me. Arthur Prescott had been right about one thing: I was being tested the same way my mother had been. The question was whether I would pass where she had failed. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that elsewhere on the yacht, another test was reaching its conclusion. Amelia had waited until the commotion drew everyone to the control room before slipping into my mother's private cabin. The safe stood open, its contents spread across the desk where I had left them. The USB drive, the crucial evidence that could destroy Arthur Prescott, sat beside the laptop still connected from when I had played the recordings hours earlier. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. Arthur had promised her 50% of everything if she delivered this drive, 50% of a fortune that should have been hers by right if only the world had been fair, if only her father hadn't lied to her, if only her birth mother hadn't abandoned her and then returned to steal what remained of her life. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the photograph of my mother and Victoria smiling together in happier times. Maybe it was the memory of my face when I learned the truth about our family. Or maybe it was simply curiosity, a need to understand what was on this drive that made it worth so much to so many people. She plugged the USB into the laptop and began to play the recordings. At first, it was what she expected: my mother and Victoria arguing, Arthur Prescott's smooth voice mediating business discussions that meant little to someone outside the industry. She fast-forwarded through several files, growing impatient, wondering why this evidence was so valuable. Then she found a recording dated 3 months before my mother's death. Arthur's voice filled the cabin, but he wasn't speaking to my mother or Victoria. He was speaking to someone else, a woman whose voice Amelia recognized with a shock that drove the breath from her lungs. "The medication adjustment is working," Patricia said. Patricia, Amelia's birth mother, the stepmother who had tried to drown me just hours ago. "She's confused most of the time now. Can barely remember what day it is. Richard thinks it's natural cognitive decline, but I've been doubling the doses whenever I get the chance." "Excellent." Arthur's voice was warm with approval. "Keep it up. We need her incapacitated before the quarterly board meeting. If she shows up lucid, she might convince the directors to reject the restructuring proposal. And after, when she's gone, Richard will inherit enough to keep him comfortable and compliant. The real assets will flow through the channels we've established. You'll receive your share as promised. What about the daughters? Amelia is useful. She'll inherit the family name and provide legitimacy for Richard's continued involvement in the business. Monica is a problem. Eleanor has been hiding assets in that girl's name for years, and I can't touch them while she's alive." A pause. "We'll deal with Monica after her mother is out of the picture. One crisis at a time." The recording ended. Amelia sat frozen, her hands still on the laptop's touchpad, her mind refusing to process what she had just heard. Her birth mother, the woman who had abandoned her, then returned to play stepmother while hiding their true relationship, had helped poison the only mother Amelia had ever really known. Patricia hadn't just stood by while Eleanor Campbell died. She had actively participated in her murder, increasing medication doses, watching her deteriorate, all for a share of the profits. Everything Amelia had believed about her family, about her place in it, about the people who claimed to love her, all of it was built on corpses and lies. She ejected the USB drive and held it in her palm, feeling its weight, understanding for the first time what it truly represented. This tiny device contained proof that her birth mother was a murderer. It contained proof that the father she had worshipped was a willing accomplice. And it contained the only hope of justice for the woman who had raised her with genuine love, despite having every reason to resent her existence. Amelia stood at a crossroads. She could still deliver the drive to Arthur, still claim her 50%, still salvage something from the wreckage of her life. Or she could do something she had never done before, something that terrified her more than poverty, more than rejection, more than being alone. She could choose her sister over herself. Amelia walked out of the cabin and headed toward the control room, the USB drive clutched in her hand. I was watching Harrison fight a losing battle against the cyber attack when Amelia appeared in the doorway of the control room. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, and she clutched something small in her trembling hand. When our eyes met, I saw something I had never seen in my sister before: shame. "Monica," her voice cracked, "I need to tell you something. I need to tell you everything." The control room fell silent. Harrison paused his frantic typing. Captain Shaw lowered his radio. Even Victoria, who had been coordinating with her security team in the corner, turned to watch. Amelia walked toward me with the unsteady gait of someone approaching a confession booth. When she reached me, she opened her hand to reveal the USB drive, the evidence I had left in my mother's cabin, the evidence that could destroy Arthur Prescott. "I was going to steal this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur contacted me after you revealed the truth about my parentage. He promised me 50% of everything if I delivered the evidence to him. I agreed because I was angry and scared and I didn't know what else to do." "I know," I said quietly. "I heard your phone call." The color drained further from her face. "You knew and you didn't stop me. I wanted to see what choice you would make." Amelia closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I made the wrong choice. I was going to betray you, Monica. I was going to help the man who killed our mother, who killed the woman who raised me, who loved me, despite everything, just because I was too weak to face the truth about my own family." She pressed the USB drive into my palm. "But then I listened to the recordings, and I heard something that changed everything." Her voice hardened with a fury I recognized. "I heard Patricia, my birth mother, discussing how she was poisoning Eleanor, increasing her medication doses, helping Arthur make her appear mentally unstable. My own mother helped murder the only person who ever truly cared about me." The revelation landed heavily, though I had suspected something similar since learning Patricia's true identity. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the anguish in Amelia's voice, made it real in a way suspicion never could. "There's more," Amelia continued. She pulled out her phone and handed it to me. "I recorded my conversations with Arthur, all of them. I didn't trust him even when I was agreeing to help him. I thought the recordings might be useful leverage someday." A bitter laugh escaped her. "I guess they are just not the way I intended." I scrolled through the audio files. Dates, timestamps, conversations in which Arthur Prescott explicitly discussed his plans to destroy me, to steal my inheritance, to eliminate anyone who stood in his way. Combined with my mother's recordings, this was enough to bury him. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you giving me this? You could have walked away with millions." Amelia met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw her clearly, not as the pampered princess who had tormented me throughout childhood, but as another casualty of our father's manipulation. Because I listened to those recordings, and I realized something. My birth mother helped kill the only mother I ever had. My father used me as a weapon against the only sister I ever had. And Arthur Prescott saw me as nothing but a tool to be discarded when I stopped being useful. She took a shaky breath. "I'm tired of being used, Monica. I'm tired of being a pawn in other people's games. For once in my life, I want to make a choice that's actually mine." I looked at the USB drive in my hand, then at the phone containing Amelia's recordings, then at the screens, still flashing red with Arthur's cyber attack. My mother had anticipated so many things, but I wondered if she had anticipated this, the possibility that her two daughters might finally stand together. "Harrison," I said, "my mother's journal mentioned a fail-safe security protocol, something she built into the financial systems in case of exactly this kind of attack. Do you know how to activate it?" Harrison's eyes widened. "The Lazarus Protocol. I'd forgotten she designed it years ago, but we never had to use it." He turned back to his laptop, fingers flying. "I need the activation code. It should be in the trust documents hidden in the cheap page 47. I said, remembering a passage I had thought was merely poetic. The numbers embedded in the dedication to me. 3 minutes later, the red warnings on the screens began to disappear, replaced by green confirmation messages. The cyber attack had been stopped. My mother's fail-safe, dormant for 14 years, had activated exactly as she designed it, locking down every account, reversing unauthorized transactions, and tracing the attack back to its source. She really did think of everything. Harrison murmured something like awe in his voice. I left him to secure the systems and went to find my father. He was in the medical bay, lying on a narrow bed, while one of the crew monitored his vital signs. The stress of the evening had triggered a minor stroke, nothing life-threatening, the medic assured me, but enough to leave him weakened and disoriented. He looked small in that bed, diminished. The commanding patriarch who had terrorized my childhood had become a frail old man stripped of power and pretense. "Monica." His voice was slurred, his eyes unfocused. I'm sorry for everything." I sat beside him, feeling nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, no grief, just emptiness. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you hate us so much?" "I didn't hate you. I hated myself." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "Eleanor was everything I wanted to be, brilliant, successful, respected. And every time I looked at you, I saw her. I saw everything I would never be." His hand trembled as he reached for mine. "I allied with Arthur because he promised me power. He promised I would finally be the one in control, but I was never in control. I was just another puppet." My phone buzzed, Victoria's name on the screen. "Arthur is making his final move," she said when I answered. "He's filing lawsuits tomorrow morning claiming your mother was mentally incompetent when she created the trust. If he succeeds, everything reverts to your father's control, which means Arthur's control. We have 12 hours. The next 12 hours were the longest of my life. While Arthur Prescott's lawyers prepared their assault on my inheritance, I prepared my defense not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Victoria's connections proved invaluable. Within hours, she had arranged a press conference at the Boston Harbor Hotel, notifying every major news outlet that Monica Campbell, heir to the Mitchell Properties fortune, would be making a statement of national significance. The promise of scandal drew journalists like sharks to blood. Harrison worked through the night, organizing the evidence into an irrefutable narrative. The audio recordings from my mother's USB drive, the medical records showing her systematic poisoning, the financial documents tracing Arthur's theft of assets from both my mother's company and Victoria's, and Amelia's recordings capturing Arthur explicitly discussing his plans to destroy me. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Arthur filed his lawsuit. His lawyers presented psychiatric evaluations, claiming my mother had suffered from severe paranoid delusions during the year she established the trust. They produced witnesses, doctors, and business associates who swore under oath that Eleanor Campbell had been mentally incompetent, that her decisions during that period should be considered invalid. It was an impressive fabrication built on forged documents and purchased testimony. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the press conference. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones bristling like weapons pointed in my direction. I saw skepticism on many faces, another rich family squabbling over money, another heir crying foul when the inheritance didn't go her way. They expected drama. They had no idea what I was about to give them. "My name is Monica Campbell." I began, my voice steady, despite the fear churning in my stomach. "This morning, a man named Arthur Prescott filed a lawsuit claiming my mother was mentally incompetent when she established the trust that protects my inheritance. He's lying, and I have proof. I nodded to Harrison, who began playing the audio recordings through the conference room's speaker system. Arthur's voice filled the space, discussing his manipulation of my mother and Victoria Lane, his plans to seize their combined empires, his casual ordering of my mother's death. The journalist's skepticism transformed into shock, then into the hungry alertness of predators scenting prey. These recordings were made by my mother in the months before her death, I continued. She knew she was being murdered. She knew Arthur Prescott was responsible. And she hid this evidence where only I would find it trusting that someday I would be strong enough to expose the truth. Emilia stepped forward to stand beside me, a gesture that surprised even me, though we had discussed it the night before. Her presence sent a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. "My name is Emilia Campbell," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "I'm Monica's sister, and until recently I was helping Arthur Prescott try to steal her inheritance." She paused, letting the admission sink in. "I'm here today because I discovered that Arthur Prescott, with the help of my own biological mother, murdered the woman who raised me. I have recordings of my conversations with Arthur that prove his conspiracy. I'm offering those recordings and my testimony to any law enforcement agency that wants them." The press conference erupted. Questions flew from every direction. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted over each other, trying to be heard. But I wasn't finished. "I'm also releasing evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission," I announced over the chaos. Evidence of market manipulation, fraud, and financial crimes spanning 2 decades. Arthur Prescott didn't just destroy my family. He systematically dismantled dozens of companies, manipulated markets for personal profit, and left a trail of ruined lives behind him. I looked directly into the nearest camera. "Mr. Prescott, if you're watching this, is what justice looks like. Not revenge, not cruelty, just truth exposed to the light." The aftermath unfolded with the inevitability of an avalanche. By noon, federal investigators had obtained emergency orders freezing Arthur Prescott's assets pending investigation. By evening, 3 of the witnesses who had testified to my mother's mental incompetence had recanted, admitting they had been paid to lie. By the following morning, Arthur's lawsuit had been dismissed, and he was facing criminal charges for fraud, conspiracy, witness tampering, and a dozen other offenses that carried sentences measured in decades. I watched the news coverage from the Yacht's main salon, surrounded by the people who had helped me survive the longest night of my life. Victoria sat in a corner, her expression unreadable as she watched the empire of the man who had manipulated her for years crumble to dust. Mrs. Hawthorne had called from her hospital bed, her voice weak but triumphant, to congratulate me on achieving what she and my mother never could. Even Emilia was there, sitting apart from the others, still uncertain of her place in this new reality we were building. Harrison appeared at my elbow, holding an envelope I hadn't seen before. It was old, the paper yellowed with age, bearing my mother's handwriting on the front. "For Monica to be opened only when you win." "Your mother gave this to me the same day she gave me the USB drive," Harrison said quietly. "She made me promise not to deliver it until Arthur Prescott had been defeated. She believed you would win Monica. Even when she was dying, even when everything seemed hopeless, she believed in you." I took the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of my mother's faith pressing against my palm. Whatever was inside it represented her final message, the last words she would ever speak to the daughter she had sacrificed everything to protect. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. Not in front of all these people with cameras still rolling and reporters still calling for statements. "Thank you, Harrison," I said. "I'll read it when I'm alone." He nodded, understanding. "Take your time. You've earned that much." I waited until the yacht was quiet, until the reporters had gone, and the lawyers had departed, and even Victoria had retreated to her own vessel. Only then, standing alone on the deck beneath a canopy of stars, did I allow myself to open my mother's final letter. The paper was fragile with age, the ink slightly faded, but her handwriting was unmistakable, those elegant loops and careful strokes that I remembered from childhood birthday cards and encouraging notes tucked into my school lunches. "My darling Monica," she wrote, "if you're reading this, then you've won. You've defeated Arthur Prescott and reclaimed everything he tried to steal. You've proven yourself stronger, smarter, and braver than I ever was. I am so proud of you, prouder than any words could ever express. You don't need to be like me. You only need to be yourself. And that self, my beautiful daughter, is magnificent." The tears came then, tears I had been holding back for 14 years through exile and struggle, and the long, lonely process of rebuilding myself from nothing. They weren't tears of sadness, though grief was part of them. They were tears of release, of healing, of finally allowing myself to feel the love my mother had poured into every hidden document, every secret account, every carefully laid plan. She had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. She had prepared for my victory, even as she faced her own defeat. And somehow, impossibly, her faith had been justified. I stayed on the deck as the hours passed, watching the stars fade and the eastern sky begin to lighten. By the time dawn approached, I had made a decision, one that felt right, in a way nothing had felt right since the night I was thrown out of my childhood home. I would transform my mother's empire into something new. The Mitchell Properties fortune, built through decades of work and nearly destroyed by greed and betrayal, would become the foundation for a different kind of legacy. I would create an organization dedicated to helping women who had suffered. What my mother suffered, family abuse, financial manipulation, the systematic destruction of their confidence and independence. The pain that had created this wealth would now be channeled into healing. It was revenge transformed into redemption. It was the ending my mother deserved. The first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of gold and rose. I stood at the railing, breathing in the salt air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Behind me I heard footsteps on the deck, soft, measured, familiar, in a way I couldn't immediately place. "I always knew you would win." The voice stopped my heart. I turned slowly, afraid to believe what I was hearing, certain that grief and exhaustion had finally broken something in my mind. But the woman standing before me was no hallucination. She was older than I remembered. Silver-haired now, her face lined with years of hiding her frame, thinner than the mother who had tucked me into bed as a child. But her eyes were the same, those warm, intelligent, loving eyes that I had inherited, that I saw every time I looked in a mirror. "Mom?" The word came out as a whisper. Eleanor Campbell, alive, aged but whole, opened her arms, and I fell into them like a child, sobbing against her shoulder, 14 years of grief and longing and desperate hope pouring out of me in a flood I couldn't control. "How?" I managed. "The death certificate, the funeral. All arranged," she murmured into my hair. "Arthur was going to kill me. The only way to survive was to let him think he had succeeded. Mrs. Hawthorne helped me disappear. I've been watching you ever since, Monica. Watching you grow, watching you struggle, watching you become the woman I always knew you could be." I pulled back to look at her face, needing to see her to confirm she was real. "Why didn't you tell me all those years I thought you were dead?" My mother cupped my face in her hands, her eyes glistening with tears of her own. "Because you needed to become powerful on your own. If I had revealed myself, Arthur would have found us both, and you wouldn't have discovered your own strength." She smiled, that warm, radiant smile I remembered from childhood. "But you did, my darling. You became more than I ever dreamed." We stood together as the sun rose fully over the ocean. Mother and daughter reunited at last. The yacht began to move, carrying us toward the horizon, toward a future neither of us could have imagined. As the sun rose over the Atlantic that morning, I realized something profound. The woman I had become was not shaped by the fortune I inherited or the enemies I defeated. I was shaped by every moment of struggle, every tear shed in lonely apartments, every time I chose to stand up when the world told me to stay down. My mother watched me from across the deck, her eyes filled with 14 years of unspoken love. She had sacrificed everything, her identity, her freedom, her chance to watch her daughter grow so that I could become strong enough to save myself. That is the truest form of love a mother can give. Arthur Prescott now sits in a federal detention center awaiting trial on charges that will keep him imprisoned for the rest of his natural life. Victoria Lane and I will never be friends, but we have found an unexpected peace, two women who finally understand that we were never really enemies, just pawns manipulated by a master who saw our strength as a threat. Emilia calls me every Sunday now. We are learning to be sisters slowly, carefully building something real from the ashes of lies we were both raised on. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but we have time. And Mrs. Hawthorne, Eleanor Hawthorne, my mother's dearest friend and Victoria's abandoned daughter, is recovering. She will carry the scars of Arthur's poison for the rest of her life, but she carries them with the same quiet dignity she has shown in everything. The Campbell Foundation officially launched last month. We have already helped 237 women escape situations of financial abuse and family manipulation. Each one of them reminds me why my mother fought so hard, why she planned so carefully, why she never stopped believing that good could triumph over evil. I am Monica Campbell. I am my mother's daughter, and this is only the beginning. Thank you so much for staying with me through this incredible journey. If Monica's story touched your heart, if you felt her pain and celebrated her victory, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. What moment in this story moved you the most? Was it the revelation about Emilia's true mother, the discovery that Eleanor was alive, or perhaps Monica's decision to transform her inheritance into a foundation helping other women? Tell me your thoughts. I read every single comment, and your feedback helps me bring you more stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that strength can rise from the darkest circumstances. And remember, no matter what battles you are facing in your own life, you have the power to write your own ending. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and never stop believing in yourself.